Hello everyone watching the video, and welcome to the Airline Pilot Guy Show. I'm Captain Jeff, a pilot for a major U.S. legacy airline, and I do this show called the Airline Pilot Guy, and you are watching via this video me record my audio podcast. If you'd like to find out more about the show and look at the show notes for this particular recording, etc., head over to airlinepilotguy.com/121, and you'll find all the stuff that I talk about on today's episode and also other ways that you can listen to me. Again, as I said, primarily an audio podcast. So it's just me sitting here for the next probably close to 3 hours talking. So if you're interested in watching, sit back and relax and enjoy the show. If not, I suggest you go find something else. Thanks. Airline Pilot Guy. Oops. Let me try that again. Okay. Airline Pilot Guy, episode 121.
Flight 209, you are cleared for takeoff. Roger. LA to 123.9.
Roger. Request connected.
Hello, you're listening to the Airline Pilot Guy Show, the view from my side of the cockpit door. I'm Captain Jeff, your host, broadcasting live from Studio 2130 at the Wyndham Hotel in El Paso, Texas. In today's episode, a quadrocopter pilot gets assaulted by a drone-hating woman. A Bonanza crashes in Monroe, Louisiana. An Air Force pilot helps land a United flight after the captain becomes incapacitated. More news and feedback, so get all settled in. Tray tables and seat backs in their upright and locked positions. Electronic devices powered on. Flight 121 is ready for pushback. Hello everyone, and again, welcome to the Airline Pilot Guy Show. I am Captain Jeff, and I'm an airline pilot. That's why I call it the Airline Pilot Guy Show. Basically, I'm the airline pilot answer man guy person. And I do this little audio podcast every week and mainly answer your questions, but also talk about some items that pique my interest in the news. And so there you have it. Right now, I'm on day 2 of a 4-day trip. And last night, we were in Philadelphia. Today, or this afternoon and tonight, in El Paso, Texas. Last time I was here, I had a great meetup with Armando, and he took me out to dinner, but I decided to give Armando a break this week, and I had a lot of other things to do as well as prep for this podcast, so hopefully I'll get finished with this in the next 2-3 hours, and I'll be able to grab a bite to eat before it's time for me to hit the sack, as they say. And weather so far this trip has been pretty good. Yesterday, going from Atlanta to Philadelphia, had to get rerouted around some heavier thunderstorm cells and systems up toward the Philadelphia area. But we got in safe and sound, obviously. And let's see, today, pretty straightforward. Again, just a little bit of deviating here and there, but for the most part, really nice weather between Philadelphia, Atlanta, and here. Tomorrow, 2 legs, we end up in Norfolk, Virginia, back on the East Coast. And then Friday, back to Atlanta, and I think we do a Chicago turn again. Not positive about that, but I guess I could try to find my trip sheet, my rotation printout, but I don't know where it is. So anyway, that's all. Okay, last week on my show, I mentioned that after I recorded the show, I was going to meet up with a couple of listeners in Cleveland, and that I did. We had a great time right next door to the hotel, a place called City Tap. Had a great beer selection, and got to meet up with PJ, who is actually not from Cleveland. He's from Houston. Paul, who is from the general northern Ohio, Cleveland area, not exactly Cleveland, and Paul's friend Ron. And Paul and Paul's friend are involved with the glider or soaring club up there, and told a lot of great stories. In fact, Paul had a great video showing him in a glider, and it was great GoPro video, and I have encouraged him to sign up with YouTube and post it on YouTube, and then when he does, he's going to let me know, and then I'm going to give you a link and you can watch it. Really interesting stuff. I've always been interested in gliding, soaring, that kind of thing, and I hope to do that someday. So we had a great time, and I recorded a little bit of our meetup. I wasn't sure exactly how that would work, so I took my iPad, which is what I'm using right now to record the video, with me, and set it up and tapped into their Wi-Fi system and fired up Ustream. I have a page on the airlinepilotguy.com site called airlinepilotguy.com/live, and there, I think it's still there, you can go and watch a little bit. It's not that long, maybe 4 or 5 minutes of us sitting at the table in the City Tap and enjoying some beer and great conversation. So if you're interested in seeing what a live meetup looks like, head over to airlinepilotguy.com/live. Okay, got that out of the way, and let's see. Anyway, it was great fun meeting in person PJ, Paul, and Paul's friend Ron. Okay, recurrent training. I got home from my trip on Thursday of last week, finished the editing, and posted episode 120. And then I thought, it's time now for me to get into the books because, hey, tomorrow night, you idiot, you have recurrent training. And that has varied from every 6 months when I was first hired more than 25 years ago. And then they moved it for a very, very long time. It was just once a year. And then a couple of years ago, they decided to move it to every 9 months. I'm not sure why. But I heard a rumor while I was in training this past round that they are going to move it back to every year. So that's good news. Now, as far as training, here I wrote down some notes. As a recurrent training, which my wife calls remedial training, I was on Friday and Saturday night. The brief times were at 6 o'clock, and got into the simulator around 7, got out of the sim around 8, 9, 10, 11 o'clock, and then with the debriefing, it was close to midnight each night. Actually, not so late the Saturday night, because that was kind of our shorter session, and we did our line-oriented flying training on that particular ride. We did some other things as well. So I thought it was kind of odd. I wrote down here, the cycle was not a maneuvers evaluation, so we didn't have any V1 cuts, engine failures, etc. We did do wind shear encounters and recoveries, stall recoveries, CFIT, which is controlled flight into terrain recovery techniques, unreliable airspeed. We have a new checklist procedure covering that, so we went over that a little bit. Did some Cat 3 approaches, some non-precision approaches, and some next-gen arrival procedures training, and then, of course, the line-oriented flying training, the loft. Did a little bit of manual flying, and I mean a little bit of manual flying. And you know how I feel about how we should be emphasizing manual flying. I am not very satisfied with the emphasis on that right now. So I think we can do better. So hopefully that'll improve over time. And speaking of training, I saw a great post just recently about present-day training at the major airlines. And this is from the blog FL250, which is Flight Level 250.blogspot.com. Actually, that's the address. I think that is called now Taking Wing. I believe Sam has changed the name from something to something else. Let's see if I have that still on one of my tabs. No, I don't see it. Anyway, I'll have a link to the great article in the show notes. But essentially, he's talking about his impression of the way training has kind of evolved over time, and what he thinks about it. And I also commented on his blog, basically saying I think it has not evolved, but devolved over time, and I think the pendulum is kind of swinging back to the old days when we got so involved in the little intricate details of systems and everything else that you could pretty much go out to the tarmac, take an airplane apart, and put it back together. Of course, that's an exaggeration. So that extreme to present day, where don't worry about that. We don't expect you to know any of that stuff about that system. Just if something goes wrong and you see a light, look at what the light says, and then get into the quick response handbook or quick reaction handbook. Again, I keep forgetting what the formal name of that is, the QRH, and basically the emergency checklist, we used to call it. Then we started calling these things abnormals. Now we call them non-normals. It's like every year it's something different, but it's the same thing. You know what I mean? But our training has gotten to the point where, you hardly know anything at all. And now it's kind of swinging back, I think, toward the middle, where it's a nice balance between in-depth knowledge of systems and knowing how to respond to a problem by following the checklist. Following a checklist can be kind of complicated. In fact, that's one of the things I dread when I go to the simulator is, gosh darn, I hope I don't have to have my co-pilot fly, because that means I'm going to have to get that darn QRH out and start following the checklist. And let me tell you what, some of these checklists can really be kind of complicated, and you can end up taking a wrong turn somewhere. And when you do, basically you create more of an emergency just on your own by doing the wrong thing and not following the right checklist. So that is an art in itself. So anyway, if you're interested in reading the article, the blog post from Sam, The Way We Train Today, I'll have a link to that in the show notes. And Sam, if you're listening, number one, welcome aboard. And number two, great job on your analysis of present day training. Okay, and one more thing I wanted to talk about before we start talking about the coffee fund and then jump into the news is the recent motor vehicle tragedy involving several comedians, among them Tracy Morgan. I didn't think that Tracy Jordan sounded right. Tracy Morgan, James McNair, Harris Stanton, Artie Fuqua, and Jeffrey Millier. I'm not sure how you pronounce it. I've never heard of Jeffrey. Anyway, a bunch of comedians going back from some kind of a gig in Atlantic City or something, and they were on the New Jersey Turnpike, and I guess there was a truck driver who had been up for like 24 hours and didn't see the traffic slowing down and plowed right into the back of this Mercedes limo van thing. And one of the comedians died, James McNair, and Tracy Morgan suffered several severe injuries, and he is now in critical but stable condition. And in one of the articles I was looking at, the comedian Harris Stanton, who broke a wrist, but his injuries were not as severe as everybody else's, which prompted me to investigate whether or not people were wearing seat belts in this incident. And from what I can tell, although it's not definitive, that's a question that's still being investigated right now. It looks like the only guy that had the seatbelt on was this Stanton guy who has a broken wrist. And everybody else who has all the severe injuries, and including one who died in the accident, probably did not. Again, that's not definitive, but I suspect that we're going to find out that everybody that sustained the serious injuries did not have their seatbelts on. Which reminds me, every single time I get in a van, I'm on these trips, and we go from the airport to the hotel back to the airport. I look around and do a little bit of a survey to see who is wearing a seatbelt. And usually, I'd say 9 times out of 10, 8 times out of 10, it's just the driver of the vehicle and me. Everybody else, including pilots, flight attendants, everybody else, are not wearing seatbelts. And I'm wondering why. Why do you think that you're protected by some kind of a special airline bubble, that you're not going to be in an accident? And as I said before, I've actually covered trips on short notice because airline crews have been injured in accidents. And usually the severe injuries are caused by the fact that people didn't have their seatbelts on. Come on, people, if you're listening to me right now, I know you put your seatbelts on when you drive your own car. If you have children, I know you make them wear seatbelts. But when you're on a trip, ask yourself, am I wearing my seatbelt? Now, I know there are a couple times that I've been in vehicles that either the seatbelts aren't working or they don't even have seatbelts installed, like if you're on a big bus or something. But usually the kind of vehicles that we're in have seatbelts, and it's just a matter of reaching over and buckling up. I mean, I think it's especially ironic that these flight attendants that I rode in with today were not wearing their seatbelts, and I bet these are the same flight attendants that are going to be all over your case in the airplane because you don't have your seatbelt fastened. Right? So take heed and be safe and buckle up if you're in any kind of moving vehicle, if you can. Okay, I'm going to step down now from my soapbox about seatbelt usage, and I'm going to push this button. And yes, it is the Java Jive, the official theme music for Captain Jeff's Coffee Fund.
I love coffee, I love
The Ink Spots recorded this in 1940. It is in the public domain. Would you people please just leave me alone, okay? You don't own this song. I don't either. So, anyway, to help offset some of the costs of producing my podcast and to contribute to my oh-so-awful caffeine addiction, I have a coffee fund. And since the last episode, on PayPal, the classic coffee fund method, I have EJ, Jeff, Han or Han, and Brian. Thank you, all of you, for your fine, your kind, your generous contributions. I do appreciate it. And I'm sure so does everybody else. All right. So we're going to fade out the Ink Spots. Java Jive. I love the guy. Whoops. Okay, I won't sing. There we go. It is fading out. It has already faded out. Okay, anything else before we get on with the news? I don't think so. So let me push this button right here.
It's the news. The Airline Pilot Guide. News.
I don't know why I did that. I'm bored. All right. Just in. I just read this morning in the van, the one where nobody was buckled up, to the airport in Philadelphia. And this is from Ars Technica, a great technical blog. And let's see here. Let me get over here to this page. Seems that a woman, well, first of all, this guy was flying a quadrocopter, a UAV, unmanned aeronautical system, aviation system, a drone, a little quadrocopter that had a camera mounted to it, and he was flying it about 50 feet. Let's see. It was, according to the dude, I never went below 50 feet, save for takeoff and landing. And then after the end of my last flight, some crazy lady came over and started taking pictures of me and dialed 911. Okay, so he happened to be there with his iPhone or a smartphone and had the video recorder on, and she didn't realize it. So I'm going to play a little bit of this this smartphone video. Here's the young lady not happy with this man. Her name is Andrea Mears, 23.
Stop.
Is this your property?
Stop. This guy is taking pictures and trying to upload them.
Okay, she's on the phone with the police.
Camera. Can you guys get here? At Hammonasset at Middle Beach. He's
Okay.
taking pictures of people on the beach with a helicopter plane.
Okay, so
Yeah, can you guys hurry?
let me advance this a little bit when
I
she
already talked to them. Just
gets a little
come.
bit more upset.
I'm at Middle Beach. Get some people.
Okay, here's when she attacks him.
You're assaulting me, you asswipe!
Oops. Need to bleep that out.
Oh!
Yeah, that's right.
They're scuffling on the ground. Okay, now he's pointing the phone so you can see her, and she's like grabbing his shirt, basically ripping it off and hitting him on the head. I'll have the link to the video in the show notes if you want to watch it
Yeah,
yourself.
you want to take pictures?
She's assaulting this guy, so here, that's enough. Let's see. They basically said, the police said that they'd send someone when somebody gets free during each of the 3 calls she made. So she decided they didn't care enough about the situation, and so that's when she assaulted the man. And then she decided to stop when she got a phone call. And then he called the police to report the assault. And boy, was the response big. 10 or more vehicles arrived. Cops, DEEP, whatever that is, D-E-E-P, and an ambulance. The police approached me very aggressively, believing her full story, and before anything else was said, I brought up something that she had missed. The fact that the cell phone in my hand has a camera, and that I was recording everything. I had video evidence that she went nuts, completely unprovoked, and was the one that assaulted me. She was then charged with assault and breach of peace, and I gave the cops a copy of the video for their prosecution. I then also showed them my last flight, where you can make out her colorful shirt getting up from the beach, then following it until it lands, which proved that she lied when claiming that she asked me to stop flying before calling the police. At the end of it all, one of the officers said to me basically, quote, "Flying that thing the way you were is fine. You're not in any trouble. You can come back and fly. Just be aware that some people can be alarmed." So there you have it. If you want to see the article and the link to the video, just look for it in the show notes. And I thought that was kind of interesting. Okay, let's see. Next. Okay, we remember me talking about this story back, well, I probably talked about this at the beginning of January, where there was a flight where a captain had a heart attack, and the co-pilot took over and landed the airplane in Omaha. And since then, or since that point, there was a military publication that did an interview with a gentleman that was on the flight. And I don't think at the time that we knew anything about this, this part of the story had transpired. And so I'm sure that if you've been watching the news in the last week or so, you, have seen all of the big news outlets, MSNBC, CNBC, Fox News Channel, CNN, etc., where they are either interviewing this guy or talking about this story. And so I remember watching a segment on Fox News Channel, and they say something like, "Does anyone know how to fly?" Like this article right here. I don't know where this is from. I think from Yahoo News. "Does anyone know how to fly a plane? It's the last thing you want to hear your flight attendant announce over the plane's loudspeaker. But that's exactly what happened on United Flight 1637 on December 30th. Well, no, that's not exactly what happened. They did not say, "Does anyone know how to fly a plane?" They said, "Are there any non-revenue pilots on board?" Okay, that is something entirely different. Captain Mark Gongol, currently an Air National Guard C-130 pilot with experience and is active Air Force flying the B-1B Lancer strategic bomber in the U.S. Air Force, was on board the airplane with his wife and daughters returning from holidays after visiting family in Des Moines, Iowa. Captain Gongol told the Air Force Space Command in his first interview since the incident that about half an hour into the flight, he became aware of the plane's engines powering down. and the aircraft began to descend and veer to the right. And have a little bit of audio here. One of the outlets interviewed him, and I have some excerpts from that.
You know, I knew we were diverting already. I could tell the plane was slowing down, descending, and turning, and you could feel that in the seat of your pants. I knew we were diverting, and I just didn't know the reason why. And as soon as she said, asked for a doctor, I knew it was medical. As soon as she said, any non-revenue pilots on board, please ring your call button, I knew, okay, I now know who the patient is. Okay, any non-revenue pilots? My first real thought was, I should ring my call button if nobody else does, and at least see if I can be of help. At no point was I ever worried about anyone's safety at all. You know, there's 2 pilots on board every American civil airliner, and they're both fully qualified, highly trained, highly capable pilots. And as long as nothing is going wrong with the airplane, which is also exceedingly rare, flying the airplane is really a one-person job.
Thank you. That's probably the most important thing he said, that every civilian airliner in the United States and most parts of the world have 2 highly qualified pilots aboard, and each one by themselves can fly the airplane. Okay, the reason why we have 2 up there is to kind of balance out some of the duties involved, so not one person has to do everything all the time, and number 2, for somebody to cross-check in case there's some kind of a mistake made or a misunderstanding about a clearance or whatever, safety. And 3, hey, what if one of the pilots becomes incapacitated, like, let's say, has a heart attack, like happened in this instance? So, yeah, that's the reason why 2 of us are up there, but we are both, my co-pilot and myself, are fully qualified to fly the jet without a problem. And thank you, Mark, Captain Mark, for stating so in your interview. Of course, the news media don't even hear that. You know, it goes in one ear and out the other, because it's not a story if it's no big deal, you know. So, okay, let me go on with the recording. You know, I knew we were diverting already. Oops. I could tell. Excellent, what's called crew resource management. All right. I'm sorry. Going wrong with the airplane, which is also exceedingly rare. Here, now we're going back to the place where I left off. Flying the airplane is really a one-person job. Okay. First officer exercised excellent, what's called crew resource management. She could have done it on her own. I'm fully confident of that, knowing what I know of her. She's a wonderful person, a tremendously talented pilot. She could have gone it alone, but she didn't have to, and she chose to see if she had another resource available to her, in this case, another pilot. Okay. She didn't have to, she didn't need to, but she wanted to. And she had another resource available, another pilot, and so she utilized that resource. And so I was all too happy to say, I'm here if you want to use me in this regard. I'm here if you want my help. She never needed it, but if you want it, I'm here for you. Good. She flew the whole time, and that's something else I want to make clear too, is that she did all of the flying. I just backed her up on the checklist and backed her up on the safety of flight items, if you will. Okay, again, she did all the flying. He did not even touch the controls. He was just up there to help. I'm a very fortunate person in that I live in a great country, and I'm free to do a job I love, flying airplanes for the Ohio Air National Guard. And I just happened to be in the very right place at the right time in an event where something went terribly wrong at the onset. But after that initial event, and these are the words of the captain, by the way, too, afterwards, after that initial event, everything else that went right, everything else that could have gone right, went right. And thank you very much. I applaud you, Captain Mark, for trying to point out all of the errors in the way this is being reported. And it sounds like he's an upstanding young man. And again, he was just there to help. But you read these articles and you hear all these things on the television news, and you'd think that that airplane was basically out of control until he happened to appear in the cockpit, and then he said, like, move over, I'm going to fly this airplane and land it, and you, co-pilot, you can do this and that. No, that's not the way it worked at all. There was nothing, provocative or exciting about this whole thing. So anyway, he goes on. As he walked up to the flight deck, he saw the flight attendants and two passenger nurses were tending to the pilot, looking sweaty, clammy, and disoriented. That's the way I look all the time. Suggesting that he'd experienced cardiac trauma. After they moved the pilot, I was asked by the first officer, "Are you a pilot?" which was quickly followed with, "What do you fly?" I knew she was in a serious situation, and that question gave her 5 seconds to judge if I would be useful. I also had about 5 seconds to assess her. Was she panicking, or was she okay to fly the aircraft? We both finished our silent assessments. She made the right judgment and told me to close the door and have a seat. And so this article goes on to say, Gongol talked through a myriad of issues with his new co-pilot, like cabin pressure, communicating with air traffic control, and their approach. No, she wasn't his new co-pilot. He was her co-pilot. He says that at about 500 feet above the ground, the co-pilot hand flew the plane to touchdown. Once she landed, there was one more surprise. The co-pilot turned to him and asked if he knew where to taxi, as she was unfamiliar with the Omaha airport they had just touched down at. And this part, I'm kind of doubtful that she asked that, because, he may have flown into an Air Force base in Omaha, but not the Omaha International or whatever their airport is, their civilian airport. Here's a quote from Captain Mark. Surprisingly, taxiing was the most stressful part of the day for the first officer. She had never taxied a 737 before, and air traffic control had no idea that the pilot was the reason for the emergency. And I wrote down here, really? When she declared the emergency, she didn't tell ATC that the captain had experienced a heart attack? Really? I find that hard to believe as well. Mark continues, we had to make a quick decision that her switching to the captain's seat and taxiing the aircraft without training was necessary to save the captain's life. The co-pilot brought the plane to a stop, and before long the passengers were all safely off the plane. The captain, who experienced the heart attack, is now said to be recovering, while Captain Mark says that he merely assisted in the operation that day, and he wasn't the hero that day. It's hard not to think what could have happened had it not been for Captain Gongol and the co-pilot's quick thinking and skill. And then I put here at the... No, it's not that hard. Nothing would have been different in this incident. The first officer would have done everything that she did anyway, plus talk on the radio. So, and now getting back to the taxiing part, some of you, especially you Airbus guys, are thinking, why didn't she just, taxi the airplane from her right seat? Well, I know that the Airbus has a steering tiller on the right side as well, but the Boeings do not, or at least the 737 series doesn't. So that's why she had to get up, switch seats with him, get over there and taxi the airplane. So again, another example of how the media just either doesn't get it, or they get it, but they just want to make it a sensational story by making it sound like this is a guy that was just a hero, and it hadn't been for him, the airplane would have crashed, apparently. But of course, I'm glad that we have the audio of Captain Mark Gongol basically trying to straighten it out. So there you have it. Okay, let's move on. This was sent in by Darren. He says, hi, Captain Jeff. Darren here in the UK would like to tell you about a piece of news in the Sunday People newspaper involving a Ryanair jet. The article reads, police began a criminal inquiry after a Ryanair jet rolled backwards for 40 yards and smashed into an airport fire station. It is believed ground staff at Rome's Giappino, I'm probably not pronouncing that right, airport failed to put chocks behind the wheels. The Boeing 737 had 200,000 pounds of damage to its tail and may be written off. Passengers had already disembarked, an airport spokesman said. We are aware of reports that chocks were not in. Okay, I'm sorry, I had to sneeze. We are aware of reports that chocks were not in place. And Connor also sent a link to this article. So 200,000 pounds, that's about $360,000 in damage. And so they're investigating why it was not chocked and why it rolled some, what does it say, 40 meters, about 120 feet, and crashed into a building. Sad, sad, sad. And speaking of planes bumping into things and each other, at Boston, a Southwest Airlines 737 was being pushed back, and the left winglet struck the right horizontal stabilizer of a JetBlue A320, which was just sitting there, not moving, minding its own business. And it says that the JetBlue aircraft didn't sustain any damage. I find that hard to believe, but the Southwest flight was canceled, and they were put on another airplane. And it says the ground incident did not impact flight operations, according to Massport. So there you have it. Now, here's something I thought was interesting. I was looking through liveatc.net and found this recording, and I have edited it to make it a little bit more brief and take out some extraneous communications that aren't necessary for the story. But in Monroe, Louisiana, last week, a small airplane crashed in the parking lot of a fast food restaurant in northeast Louisiana, injuring the pilot. And so let's listen to the audio from this incident.
Monroe Tower, Bonanza 653 Tango.
Bonanza 653 Tango, Monroe Tower, runway 4, clear to land.
653 Tango, runway 4, clear to land. Monroe, I need to land. I've got a fuel problem.
That's Bonanza 53 Tango?
Yes, sir.
Bonanza 53 Tango, roger. You can make straight in for runway 18, clear to land.
Straight in, 18, clear to land.
Okay, so he was originally coming into runway 4 for an approach, and then I guess he realizes that he's having some kind of a fuel problem, probably fuel starvation, and so the tower thinks very quickly and so it clears him to a straight-in 18. He is coming in from the north, I believe.
5087, hold short of runway 18.
Okay, it tells an AC flight to hold short of 18.
Hold short, runway 18, 5087.
Bonanza 53 Tango, you need any assistance or anything?
No, sir, I don't think so. And Monroe, I don't think this is going to make it. I'm going to slide over.
0212. Bonanza 53 Tango, roger. And how many people y'all got on the plane?
Just me, and I'm fixing to hit the trees right now.
Hey, 5087, cross runway 18.
Cross 180 is 5087.
West Monroe Airport, make straight in, runway 4. Bonanza 53 Tango, Monroe Tower.
183 Victor Bravo.
Call Tower, say again.
Hey, 183 Victor Bravo. Do you need us to go find this guy? It looks like he's in the trees.
Bonanza 3 Victor Bravo, yes, sir. He went down behind the trees. We can't see anything from the towers. If you don't mind, could you go that direction and see what's going on?
Heading over there right now.
And it's can you see the McDonald's arches from where you're at? White water tower over that direction.
I got the water tower.
Yeah, it's right over there, just south of that water tower.
Okay, I got the water tower set. Also, I have the antennas in sight.
Okay, thank you.
183 Victor Bravo, we cleared across 18 flight path.
3 Victor Bravo, yes, sir. It's going to be, continue northbound. He's north of the field is where it went down.
Okay, going northbound. Monroe ground, we're on frequency.
Monroe ground, roger. Our correction S1, roger. And it happened, he went off those trees to your left over that dirt pile. It was on the other side of the trees over there.
Hit the service road right here, and we already sent out the other truck to catch it on the other side.
Okay, roger, thank you.
Ground Osborne, what's going on?
Envoy 36, 10-year runway heading contact departure 118.15.
1815 now, and runway heading Envoy 36, good day.
Back to you.
Ground Osborne.
Osborne, Monroe ground.
What's going on out there?
Just had a Bonanza, didn't make it all the way to the runway. Number 3 Victor Bravo, and it's going to be off to your right a little bit. Can you see the It's a white, so white water tower out that direction off your right.
Yeah, I've turned right. I'm heading now 030, and I got a white water tower on the nose, and there's a big old white roof behind that.
If you turn to about a 09 or 0 heading, it should force you towards us. It's going to be just north of the trees before you get to the field, to the airport.
S1 Munro Brown, was that communication for us?
S1 negative. I got an aircraft overflying, trying to check it out. 3 Victor Bravo should be straight ahead of you and low, maybe a little bit to your right now, about half a mile to your right wing.
Okay.
If you turn in straight on towards straight in towards 18, it should be right over his flight path. And this one, he was just on the other side of the trees. It looked like when he went in.
S1 copy. We hadn't seen anything yet. We're just going to run the fence down here. We got other trucks en route to catch you on those side of the fence.
Okay, Roger, thank you. M&S 3 Victor Bravo should be off your right wing, maybe about your 4 to 5 spot now.
Yeah, we're looking. Looks like that's a neighborhood in there. I think that would have got some attention.
Yeah, there's it looks like it's, can you see the yellow McDonald's arches?
Yes, sir.
It looks like it's just this way towards the airport from McDonald's, about halfway between those trees and the McDonald's arches.
Did you make the field, or do you think you went in the trees?
He said he was going in the trees, but we couldn't tell from the tower. Can you see anything in trees or in the parking lot or anything?
Okay, we got a lot of activity on the road there blocking traffic, so I'm assuming he's right there somewhere looking for us. Okay, he's upside down in the parking lot of McDonald's. Yeah, we got him. No fire, it looks like. Can't tell if there's any injuries or not, but there are emergency vehicles on the scene.
Okay, Roger, thank you.
Okay, we need to come back around the land now. So we're coming back in for 4?
Yes, sir. Number 3 Victor Bravo. Enter the left downwind runway 4, clear to land.
Clear to land, runway 4, left downwind. 3 Victor Bravo.
Thanks for your help.
You're very welcome, sir.
Hey, was he able to land at that McDonald's there, or did he get on the ground properly?
Yeah, he was upside down. Yeah, that's about what I was thinking, too. I don't think he made it.
All right, thanks.
No fire, though. That probably means no fuel.
Number 3 Victor Bravo. If you guys don't mind, keep your comments to a minimum on the frequency.
No problem, sir.
S1 Munro Brown, they located the planes over at McDonald's. We're returning to the station.
Excellent, Roger.
Okay, there you go. I know that was kind of a little bit long, but I thought it was pretty cool that the other Bonanza went, volunteered to go and try to find where the airplane went down, and so that was a nice thing to do. And as the pilots said toward the end, no fire. So it certainly does appear that fuel starvation could be a factor in this accident, and sadly, a factor in a lot of general aviation accidents. Okay, let's move on. An update on last episode. We talked about the Gulfstream 4 private jet that took off from Hanscom Field near Boston, and aboard were 7 people, including Louis Katz. I guess he's a billionaire that owns a partial owner of a newspaper and sports teams and that kind of thing. And let's see, they did recover the black box, the flight data recorder, and the private jet that crashed reached 190 miles per hour, which is about 165 knots, but never lifted off the ground, according to the data from the plane's black box. The flight data recorder also indicates that the pilot tried to use brakes and thrust reversers before the fiery accident that killed the 7. Tire skid marks were also found on the runway leading up to the crash site. Investigators from the NTSB say it's not yet clear why the pilot tried to slow the Gulfstream 4 before takeoff at Hanscom Field. Information received from the Gulfstream 4's cockpit voice recorder picked up a conversation between the pilot and co-pilot about an aircraft control issue, according to an NTSB investigator, but he would not elaborate and stressed that investigators had not yet determined the cause of the crash. And of course, it's only been about a week, so of course they haven't determined the cause. But I bet they have some good clues, and I'll have a link to this article along with some pictures in the show notes, where you can clearly see it looks to me, seems quite obvious that they performed a high-speed abort and just ran out of room and crashed into that gully where the river was, and caught on fire, and everybody perished, sadly. So when we find out more about that in the future, we'll talk about it. And, of course, we have this. Okay, those of you who are listeners of previous episodes know that it's been a while since I played that Bad Boys theme, that Cops theme song, and it's usually when I'm talking about the TSA, but today, no. This was not the TSA behaving badly. It was a passenger aboard a United Airlines flight, actually an express jet flight from Nashville to Houston, which had to turn around Sunday after a passenger allegedly threatened another passenger when she was asked to turn off her cell phone. And allegedly, LaShonda Williams, 43 years old, told the passenger after this passenger said, "You need to turn off your wireless device," quote, "I kill white people like you." And, of course, because of the outburst and the disruption and the fact that this passenger was now fearing for her life, because LaShonda went on to say that not only does she kill people like her, but that she would follow her after arriving in Houston and find out where she lived. Okay, so clear threat to her safety. So the let's see, the flight attendant on the airplane told police that the remark by LaShonda created anxiety and fear throughout the cabin, so they returned to Nashville, arrested LaShonda Williams, and charged her with assault. According to a United Airlines representative, ExpressJet Flight 4205, operating as United Express from Nashville to Houston on Sunday, June 1st, safely returned to Nashville due to 2 disruptive passengers. The flight landed without incident and was met by law enforcement officials before continuing to Houston. So, oh, it's that time of year. It's getting warm, getting hot. People are getting hot under the collar, apparently. And speaking of law enforcement, this from listener Kevin St. John. He sent me a link to this article from the FBI. After a successful trial program aimed at deterring people from pointing lasers at aircraft, by rewarding those people who provide information about individuals who engage in this dangerous crime and aggressively prosecuting the perpetrators, the FBI is expanding the campaign nationwide. As a key part of the publicity campaign is reward money. The FBI will offer up to $10,000 for information leading to the arrest of any individual who intentionally aims a laser at an aircraft. So apparently this trial program has been working. They've been getting good results from it, and they're going to expand it to be a permanent program and expanding it throughout the country. So that is good. All right, that is enough news for this episode. And now it's time for the best part of the show. Of course, that means your feedback.
Captain, incoming message.
Thank you. All right. Let us start with... here, I have to resort this. Okay. Ian writes, from Galloway, Ireland, "I thought you might be interested in this. I'm not too sure if you've heard about this, but when I heard about it today, I was so excited. Top Gun has to be my favorite film ever. I guess it has something to do with my passion for aviation, but it also brings back memories to a time I spent in Naval Air Station Pensacola. But that's for another feedback. I cannot wait to see the sequel and to see the reaction from all those who think pilots are fast becoming obsolete and replaced by drones. I know the post is from March, so it's a little bit dated, but I think it's well worth a mention on the show for all those who don't know about it. I haven't heard about this. Here's a link to the Huffington Post article. So he has a link there. And he says, clear skies, both tailwinds and headwinds when you need them, and no delays. And as Matt said earlier, I can't pronounce this. It's like Slanagus. I can't speak that. I cannot do it. But anyway, it's that Irish thing you say. That means, I don't know what it means. It's something good, though. Okay, let's see. So let me head over here and look at the article from the HuffPo. And did I get rid of that one, too? Oh, come on. No, here it is. Jerry Bruckheimer, the I guess the director, says Top Gun 2 will pit Tom Cruise against drones. Yay. Top Gun 2 is still happening, according to Jerry Bruckheimer, and its plot is as modern as ever. The super producer stopped by HuffPost Live on Friday. Oh, he's the producer. To discuss his new book, Jerry Bruckheimer, When Lightning Strikes, 4 Decades of Filmmaking, and also explained how the sequel could exist in today's world of warfare. Quote, we've been trying to get that movie made for 30 years. Wow, has it been that long? And I think we're getting closer and closer, Bruckheimer told Ricky Camilleri. Don Simpson and I tried to develop something. We didn't succeed. Tom Cruise took over, and he tried to develop something, and he didn't succeed. Now we're back at it. So I guess they're working on trying to get this new sequel to Top Gun 2. It says no director is yet set. So there's a link to a video of the interview. So again, I'll put this article in the show notes if you're interested. So very, very cool. And I do remember watching Top Gun, and I just happened to have been an instructor pilot in the Air Force at the time. And I remember going with a double date. My wife and I went with the squadron, no, not the squadron commander, the flight commander. I was the assistant flight commander. And he had flown F-4s in the Air Force. So I was kind of interested to see what he thought about the movie and all the maneuvers they did and everything else. And he said he was impressed. It was well done, he said. Of course, there were many things in there that were not real or couldn't really happen. But we were both impressed with the flying in that movie. All right. So thank you, Ian, for cluing us all into Top Gun 2. Okay, Akeem writes, hi, Captain Jeff. My name is Akeem. I'm from the beautiful island of Antigua. By the way, have you ever visited my beautiful island? No, but I've gotten close. I've been to Barbados and Grenada, but never Antigua. We have a local beer called Wadadli. He says, I don't consume beer, but my dad says it's good. I'm currently an aeronautical weather observer at our lone airport, Tapa, and produce all weather products, METARs, TAFs, ATIS, etc. A couple of episodes back, you were talking about weather sources, such as the Weather Underground, etc. My personal favorite for aviation purposes is the new ADDS, the Aviation Digital Data Service, redesigned website. And he has a link to it there, aviationweather.gov/ADDS/METARs, where you can get all weather products pertinent to flying and even NOTAMs, etc. The format of the site has lots of visual representations of the weather. Even after studying meteorology, I find it easier to interpret weather in a graphical format backed up by text. I do too, Akeem. I definitely do. And I mentioned in the last episode some of my favorite websites, and of course aviationweather.gov is one of my favorites, in addition to Weather Underground. Okay, Akeem continues, since I live in the Caribbean, I would like to share my is it Caribbean or Caribbean? I know that I always say the Caribbean and the Caribbean Sea, but if I go to Disney, either Disneyland or Disney World, I always say Pirates of the Caribbean. So Akeem, you have to let me know which way is right, Caribbean or Caribbean. All right. I would like to share my observation of aviation in this part of the world for aspiring pilots especially. We do not have many airlines, literally a handful, Most of them are government-owned, and most are cash-strapped. Many of them are not hiring or expanding, and if they do, the citizens of the respective shareholder governments hire their citizens first. So, it's tough and highly competitive. It is as things will turn around in these parts aviation-wise. So for the young listener in the Bahamas who contemplated getting a degree, I'd advise him to get one and make yourself marketable in case you end up having to move outside the region for a job, as aviation in the Caribbean is tough. Clear skies and tailwinds. Well, thank you, Akeem, for your advice to the gentleman asking about aviation there in the Bahamas. And thank you for sharing with us your job on the beautiful island of Antigua. And I hope that you have one or two of those wadadlis in your refrigerator with Captain Jeff's name on it, just in case I end up visiting your beautiful island someday. So thank you for taking the time to send in the feedback, sir. And that's it. All right. This is from Nick Carson. I have a few questions for you regarding NDB and other non-precision approaches. Number one, since the idea and introduction of the Instrument Landing System, or ILS, NDB, VOR, DME, among other approaches, with the exclusion of visual approaches, has been slowly faded in the standard approaches. So I ask, why is it preferred that pilots do not use these approaches, although not very accurate by today's standards? 2. Recently I've been doing more of these non-precision approaches on Flight Simulator, and I find that I do a better job of landing the plane. I enjoy these approaches as it involves more effort and skills, among other things, to do these approaches than just the typical ILS. Therefore, is it true that it involves more effort and skills in the real world and not just in Flight Simulator? And number 3, as stated above, I feel as if I do a better job flying the plane for a smooth landing at the destination than an ILS arrival does. What I do is let the plane pick up the proper NDB/VORs and glide slope to lead me to the airport. Of course, there is no glide slope, right? Then, when I see the runway, I disengage the autopilot and hand fly it down from there on. Is this the way you do it? And if you do, do you find that there is a better landing using these approaches? Okay, excuse me. Let's start with number 1. Let's see. Why is it preferred that pilots do not use these? Well, the reason why precision approaches are preferred over non-precision approaches is because they're more precise, hence the name precision. Not only do you have lateral guidance to the runway, but you also have vertical guidance, and that's important, as we have learned from recent incidents, let's say in San Francisco last year. Having a glide slope really helps. It adds a level or layer of safety. When you do a non-precision approach, you do not have that added level of safety. So it does require, answering your second question, more skills and effort to fly a non-precision approach. Now, why you end up getting a better landing out of these in your flight simulator, Nick? Maybe it's because you're concentrating a lot more, because your extra effort and skill requires that you pay more close attention to the flight path of the airplane, I'm guessing. I can tell you right now, and I think most pilots would agree with me, that the landings that I tend to get that are better than others are the landings where I'm really, really working hard. Maybe a really strong gusty crosswind, maybe a very low visibility approach, maybe thunderstorms in the area, and you have some stuff thrown in there that makes it quite a challenge. And so on those approaches, when you're working really, really hard, your mind is really engaged, your physical body is very engaged in manipulating the controls, you end up not giving up as early, I guess, and getting a good landing out of it. Whereas if it's a nice, beautiful day and you're on a nice, steady, stabilized approach on a glide path, and you flare and then you hold it back and you go, okay, you kind of give up and you don't always get the best landing. So that's my hypothesis why I end up getting better landings when things are a little bit more of a challenge. So maybe because the approach is a little bit more of a challenge for you, that's the reason why you're getting a better short approach and landing. That's a guess, of course. And let's see. So, okay, I think I just answered that. Yeah, that's it. I think I covered all your questions there. So, if we go into a place and they have a precision approach like an ILS, that'll be our first choice. Second choice would be a non-precision approach, an ILS maybe with the glide slope out. So now you have very accurate lateral guidance to the runway, but you don't have an electronic glide slope. And hopefully you will see, something before the minimum descent altitude, and then hopefully you'll have something like a vertical approach slope indicator, a VASI, or a precision approach path indicator, a PAPI, so that you can, have a visual glide path down to the runway. And one of the things you did ask that I don't believe I answered yet was, why is it that we prefer these? Well, not only because it's more precise, but also because of the precision and having the glide path all the way down to the runway. The minimums, the weather minimums, are lower. The visibility minimum and the ceiling minimum, if they have a ceiling ceiling minimum, are lower than a non-precision approach. So when we're flying into a foggy airport or an airport that has a very low ceiling, or the visibility is not very great, you want to fly the precision approach, because sometimes those non-precision approaches are not going to get you close enough for you to acquire the runway environment or the runway threshold or the runway itself, and you have to do a missed approach. So that is why, and I hope that makes sense, Nick, and thank you for your question. Okay, Brad writes, thank you for answering my questions about the bidding process a couple of shows ago. I learned a lot. So now I have a couple of follow-up questions. First, how does it work if you decide to pick up extra flying? Is that handed out based on seniority also? Well, yes and no. The scheduler looks to see if anybody wants extra flying based on regular pay rates, what we call white slip flying at my carrier, and based on seniority awards the flying. Secondly, the flying is assigned to pilots who are on reserve or on call. There's a certain percentage, usually manned by people that are at the bottom end of the seniority scale. And so instead of having a regular schedule with assigned trips, they have certain days that they're on call and certain days they're off. So the second round, if they don't have pilots with regular schedules with requests in for this extra flying, then they'll go to the reserve. They like to go with the other guys wanting the extra flying rather than going to the reserves, because they always want to keep that reserve number high so that if something really bad happens, they'll have the manning to fly the flights or cover the flights. Let's see, the third thing that they go to is, and this is a simplified, basically, way that it works at Acme Airlines. Flying is awarded to pilots who have requested extra flying based on double pay rates, and that is what we call at Acme green slips. Again, green, I guess, because of the money. If you get assigned a trip on a green slip, that means you're going to get double the hourly pay rate for doing the trip. So instead of the trip being worth 10.5 hours, it's now worth 21 hours magically. And then, again, that's based on seniority, and also whether or not everybody has been awarded a green slip, at least one, and then they'll start handing out green slip 2s and green slip 3s. And, at that point, that means that their coverage is really horrible and things have gone to heck in a handbasket. And so you don't see that a lot, but I usually average about one of those green slip trips per month, which really helps pay those tuition bills, I'll tell you. Okay, so let's see, Brad continues. How about charter trips? Do you ever do those? And if so, are there any pros, cons of picking those up from a pilot's perspective other than the obvious extra cash? Well, they pay just like any other trip does. And usually at Acme, most of the time, I'd say the majority of charter flights or non-scheduled flights are things that they know about ahead of time, so that those trips are actually placed on, or they're put out there for availability, so that when we're bidding for next month's schedule, those trips will already be on the schedule. So you bid for them just as you would bid for any other trip. Now, there are exceptions to that. Let's say, for instance, the NBA playoffs. Well, when Acme made the schedule to do these charter flights, they didn't know, who was going to be in the playoffs, who was going to be in the quarterfinals, who was going to be in the semifinals, who was going to be in the finals. Which teams. So you really can't, you can't know for sure which two city pairs you're going to be using. You can usually be pretty sure of what type of airplane you're going to be using, and you're not sure how many of those charter flights you're going to have to do, because it could be a short series, it could be a long series. So the airline has to have flexibility there, and those type of charter flights are assigned kind of on a last-minute basis. And a lot of times they're assigned to reserve pilots, or they're put into open time, which is what we call the bucket of trips that are available to be assigned, and then it goes through that process, which I just talked about in answering the first part of your question, Brad. So as far as pros and cons, and I have done charters in the past. In fact, when I flew the 727, we did a lot of baseball charters, and a lot of Braves baseball charters. I remember I must have done at least, more than 5, and maybe not quite as many as 10 over my time of flying that airplane. And those were the days before 9/11, when you'd have the door open to the cockpit, and you'd have these baseball players who were famous baseball players walking in and just watching what you're doing and asking you questions about this and that, and it was a lot of fun. So fun, that's one of the pros. Meeting famous sports personalities, if you're into sports, that's kind of cool. Or your favorite team, maybe your college team, that kind of thing. Let's see, tickets to games. Sometimes I remember a couple times we were taking up the Braves to fly, to play against the Mets, and they'd leave tickets for the crew at the will call window, and so if we wanted to, while we were up there waiting for them to play their game, we could go and watch the games ourselves. I remember a couple exhibition games at Sky Dome in Toronto, playing the Blue Jays. I think those were preseason games. Pretty good seats. We also got invited to I think again this is preseason, a game against the Toronto Blue Jays in Sky Dome, and they had a private party at the Hard Rock Cafe in Sky Dome, and it wasn't open to the public, and they gave us some tickets, or somehow let somebody know that it was okay for us to show up and to be part of that private party at the Hard Rock Cafe. Let me tell you what, that's when I got a close-up view of sports groupies. Talking about some beautiful women. Wow. And to those groupies, those very, very beautiful women, we pilots didn't exist. We were invisible because they were all focusing on those sports celebrities, and that's why they were there. And thank goodness, right? But anyway, just reminds me of one of the charter trips that we did. Food. They always put on great food on the airplane for these charter flights, and lots of it. And so we always get to dig through the leftovers after we drop the sports team off. We go in there, and they always have these huge candy bars and all kinds of. It's just stuff that we don't normally see on the airline flight. Possibility of a lot of time off, between the games or whatever the charter is that you're doing. The cons: uncertainty, dealing with the unknown, challenging runways, unfamiliar taxiways, ramps, and the hazards associated with, dropping them off not at the normal airline ramp with, wide spaces and people marshaling you into your normal parking spot and the jetway and everything else. You're going into little fixed base operators and lots of little airplanes all around the place and lots of obstacles, lots of hazards, lots of ways to get in trouble. So you have to be careful. So that's one of the cons of doing these things. And yeah, so that I think pretty much covers it. So had a lot of fun doing them. Have not done a lot of them since I've been on the Mad Dog. I think most of the sports teams charters are flown by the 757 now, and then I think for the NBA flights we have the Airbus 319s, especially outfitted for those, because those teams and support people, not a lot of people on those flights, as opposed to, let's say, a baseball team or a football team. A lot more athletes and a lot more support personnel and equipment and all that kind of stuff involved in those types of flights. So yeah, it's something different and something fun to do occasionally. So hope that answers a question, Brad. And he says, lastly, what weather app do you use? Looking at the screenshots of those recent thunderstorms you took. Thanks again. Those screenshots that I take occasionally are either from MyRadar, MyRadar, which is, I believe, both an iOS and Android app, and it may have been a snap from my phone that I took from using FlightAware, another app that's free. I have all that information in the last episode, episode 120, with links and that kind of thing if you're interested. And the way I do it, I just take on the iPhone at least, if you press the home button and the sleep button simultaneously, it'll take a snapshot, a screenshot. And that's how I do it. All right, thanks, Brad, for your questions and feedback. Okay, Andreas writes, per your recommendation, I watched Automation Dependency 0001 on YouTube. And I think, is that the one that I know as Children of the Magenta? Great video, learned a lot. And I can't but wonder if the pilots in the Asiana crash had seen this lecture, would there have been a crash? Yeah, probably. I think it has more to do with people watching videos, more like culture that they are growing up in and living in. Anyway, when done with that, I found this presentation by the same guy, American Airlines Captain Warren Vanderberg, and I learned a lot about aircraft recovery, even things I can apply when flying gliders, when I get up on that horse again and flying radio-controlled planes. I think you and your audience will like this video. So here's a link to Captain Warren Vanderberg's article on aircraft recovery. And he said, I also found this video called Aircraft Crash, Disaster, and Survival, a lecture by Brigadier General William Spruance, and he talks about his own survival from a T-38 crash and what to do and what not to do if you find yourself in an airline emergency. He talks about a lot of things you do, like wearing proper clothing, no high heels, etc. Enjoy. And so he has a link to that. So links to all of those are in the show notes, where they should be. So, have a great day. Click, click, click. Oh, that's right. He says, click, 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 click. I know you do. And that is from Children of the Magenta, from Andreas in Sweden. Thank you, sir, for your great feedback and those links, which, again, I should have in today's show notes. All right, Connor writes, I was wondering if maintenance carries out tests on the ram air turbine, the RAT, often, and how exactly would these tests be performed? Do they do a test flight or something? I don't know. Maybe one of the mechanics listening can give me an answer on that. I suspect that the ram air turbines probably just stay in their little ram air turbine cubicles until they are needed. I'm not sure if they're ever checked, but again, I could be wrong about that. Just like those life rafts that we carry. I don't think that we ever test them to make sure that they actually will inflate and float, and unless they're tested right at the beginning. I don't know. Anyway, sometimes I listen to ATC on liveatc.net, and every single time a pilot lands at Dublin, they land using an ILS approach. I was wondering if there was nice weather, which we rarely get in Ireland, by the way. Is it the pilot's decision on whether he does an ILS approach or a visual approach? Also, I believe this week marks the anniversary of Air France 447. Unfortunately, nothing much has been done to improve the relationship between automation and the pilot. Yes, sadly, I agree with you, sir. Not a lot has been done about that. Getting back to your question about visual approaches and ILS approaches, if they're advertising ILS approaches and we acquire visual contact with a runway, we will usually say runway is in sight, and then usually the next thing that the air traffic controller says, very well, you cleared the visual approach to runway blah blah blah. And and if they don't, we basically use visual approach procedures and then use the ILS as a backup to our visual approach. That's pretty, and that's, just makes sense. That's common sense use of your instrumentation just to back you up, because we are humans, and it's always a nice thing. If I'm clear to visual approach, this is what I'm trying to say. If we're initially on an ILS approach, I see the runway, I say, we see the runway, airport in sight, runway in sight, whatever. Clear the visual approach. Well, it's not like we turn off the ILS. It's still there. The flight director is still on. All the data that we would have used if we were still in meteorological conditions, IMC, is still there. We don't turn it off. I mean, we can, but we don't. It doesn't make sense to do so, especially if you're flying in low visibility or night. Let's say you have great visibility at night. It's still important that you keep the instrumentation on, so that as a backup, a safety factor. So, but it's not a pilot's decision whether you fly an ILS approach or a visual approach unless you actually have clearance to do so. Now, if you're flying into a field that is not controlled, then yes, it's your decision. But again, most of the big airports we fly into, you'll see the weather on the ATIS, and you'll see it's pretty nice. You're expecting that you're going to be flying a visual approach, even though they're advertising ILS approaches to runway 4. But when you get in and you see the runway and they're giving you vectors, and you're intercepting the localizer, and you say, hey, I have the airport in sight, then they'll usually clear you for the visual approach. And again, the only thing that really lets you do is you can kind of disregard all the altitudes on the different segments of the approach, and being aware, as you should be as a good pilot, of what the obstacles are out there, and towers and elevations and that type of thing. And if you're not sure about that and you're not familiar with it, then you should continue to fly that ILS approach procedure, but use your eyeballs as well, and visual approach procedures. So I hope that didn't muck up your understanding of that, but that's the best way I can describe whether or not we have the decision or not to fly an ILS or a visual approach. Basically, it takes away some restrictions when you're actually cleared off of the instrument approach procedure. Okay, Dave writes, when you were discussing yelling in the cockpit, it reminded me of my flight training. When I was just out of college, I worked for UPS on the ramp doing weight and balance load planning as a supervisor here in Milwaukee. I also was taking flight training to get my private pilot's license. I was talking with one of the 7.5 captains I'd become friends with and told him about doing spin training and a few other fun things. He said, yeah, that's how I learned not to raise my voice in the cockpit. Apparently he was a certified flight instructor training someone on spins. He said his procedure was to do it one time on his own, then another time with the student shadowing him hands on the yoke, feet on the pedal so they could feel the control inputs. And then, after that, the student did the spins by themselves. So he did the first two, and then when it came time to have the student do it, as they got into the spin, the student started to let the control yoke out a little bit. So the instructor, my buddy, said he just kind of raised his voice and said, "No, no, no." And with that, the student yanked the yoke into his chest, which really tightened the spin and, in fact, tumbled the gyros. He said that that was the only time that he almost puked in an airplane. And he learned a very valuable lesson. Thank you, Dave, for sharing that with us. So, yeah, don't raise your voice unless you think it's absolutely necessary. All right, Mechanic Bob comes to Captain Jeff's aid again. Thank you, Mechanic Bob. So let's hear what Mechanic Bob has to say.
Hi, Captain Jeff. It's Mechanic Bob. I was calling with some feedback for episode 119. One thing that was asked is what kind of inspections are done after an aircraft goes through severe turbulence. Usually what we look for is kind of what you said, is things like wrinkled skins, bent metal. Another thing you normally see if an aircraft has been overstressed is the rivet heads usually will tip over to the side, or the rivet heads will pop off. And each aircraft in the maintenance manual will list actually specific things they want you to check if an aircraft goes through severe turbulence. It's in the unscheduled inspections section in the maintenance manual. So if they'll basically send you to the areas that you need to look at where an overstressed aircraft will show evidence that it has been overstressed. Another thing that I was going to leave feedback on is a listener asked about bleed air for the wing anti-ice and where does it go. Basically, you have a pipe going out to your wings that goes from the wing root all the way out as far as the heated leading edge goes, and it has little tiny pinholes in it to direct the air at the leading edge skin, and that tube is called your piccolo tube. And the little pinholes blow hot air on the skin, which flows around the skin, and then you'll have exhaust ports, usually either at the wingtip where the hot air exhausts, or sometimes you'll have several exhaust ports on the bottom of the leading edge. And basically it's just that leading edge skin that's anti-iced. There really isn't any ice protection after that. And then I also had a question for you, Captain Jeff, about leaving pilot reports. One thing, I'm a new instrument pilot myself, and one thing I realized that I haven't really been trained on is leaving a pilot report. And I know I've read how to do it, it's just I never have. I know you can leave a pilot report with flight service, and I know you should, if you go into unforecast weather, then you tell ATC what kind of weather you encountered. But one thing I see a lot is flying in weather. Something is forecast and maybe the weather's nicer, and you want to leave a pilot report for somebody that, hey, everything's clear. I was wondering, is that something where you would talk to their traffic controller and tell them, hey, I want to leave a pilot report, and ask him if he has time to take it down to where other pilots will be able to see that when they're doing their briefing? Or would you switch over to flight service and talk to them? For me, I fly single pilot, so I couldn't really, it would be difficult for me to work two different radios and continue to monitor air traffic control and call flight service on the second radio. So I was just wondering what you do in that situation. Anyway, thanks again for your show, and hopefully my feedback is helpful, and I'll be talking to you again sometime.
Well, I hope so, because your feedback's always helpful and useful. You can tell he's at an airport. I hear the helicopters and stuff flying in the background. So thank you, Mechanic Bob, for answering the question about the de-icing, the anti-icing of the leading edge of the wings. And Bob also, I don't think he's a mechanic, but another Bob wrote in and said on the MD-80 family of aircraft, hot air is distributed to the slats via lengthwise perforated tubes called piccolo tubes. The hot air leaves the tubes into the D-shaped leading edge cavity in the slats and is then vented through exhaust openings. Wishing you and your listeners blue skies with peace and tranquility below. Well, thank you, Bob. And sounds like Bob might be a mechanic as well. So thanks to you both. And to answer your question about PIREPs, Mechanic Bob, yes, your intuition, your inkling is correct. I never contact flight service. Although there are occasions where I think something is significant enough that I would actually contact my dispatcher and or meteorology department people at Acme to let them know about something. But usually pilot reports, that's something entirely different. Pilot reports or PIREPs are given to ATC. And it's usually something like when you pick up icing. And because I know that that's a significant weather event for people out there flying airplanes that are not equipped to fly into known icing and don't have de-icing or anti-icing kind of systems on their airplanes like we have with transport category airplanes. So anytime we end up seeing light rime or light clear or light mixed or worse, we'll state that we're picking it up and what altitude and what the severity of it is and what the temperature is outside. And that's helpful for, again, those pilots out there who do not want to fly into areas of known icing. And the other time that's really, really important to give a pilot report, a PIREP, is if you encounter a wind shear, and that's one of those things that's pounded into us in training. So we go through a wind shear and we perform a wind shear avoidance maneuver or recovery maneuver, and basically to be a successful event, we have to say PIREP, and then we report the wind shear, and that just makes sense. That's a significant hazard, and you want to make sure that everybody out there knows about it. Now, if we're out there and we say, hey, we're picking up light chop or light turbulence or light to moderate, and we don't phrase it as a PIREP, I don't believe ATC has to pass that on to anybody else. But if you say PIREP, and I could be wrong about that, but I know for sure that if you say PIREP, that's something that's a little bit more formal. They have to record it, I believe, and they have an obligation to state that to other air crews out there so that they know about the hazard. So if I hit something that I wasn't expecting, especially, and I get into moderate or worse chop or turbulence, I automatically say, hey, I have a PIREP for you. And then I say, this is where we got it, the altitude, the severity, etc. And that way I can rest assured that the people behind me, the subsequent people in my path, will know about that hazard. And yeah, no need to switch frequencies, Mechanic Bob. Just say, and you just say November 4253 Alpha PIREP, and they go, okay, go ahead with your PIREP, and then you've fulfilled that obligation. And as far as making a PIREP for conditions that are better than you anticipated, I don't see any problem with making that PIREP to air traffic control. You may not have to necessarily phrase it as a PIREP, but it's definitely something they would like to know, because that in general helps them as well. I know that going into big, busy airports and they're flying instrument approaches or precision approach monitor, PRM approaches, radar monitoring approaches, and if you can see the airport 20 miles out, and you can keep it inside all the way and fly basically a visual approach. They would like to know that, because that means that their workload is lessened, and it makes it easier for them. So they always appreciate things when they are going in the good direction as well. So that is my advice to you, Mechanic Bob. And again, I think that you suspected that that's the way you did it, and you were correct. Okay, Rodney and Carl write. Well, Rodney writes, I guess. He's the penman. I have been a listener to this podcast since Airline Pilot Guy 118, and my friend Carl has been since, I believe, 96. Don't quote me on that. Okay, I won't quote. Well, I just did. Anyway, we both have simulators. Mine is Microsoft FSX, and Carl's is X-Plane. We both fly for virtual airlines. Mine is United, where I'm currently a first officer on the CRJ 200. Since we are both in private pilot training also, we were wondering what a DME/VOR approach is and how to do one. Also, what is a GPS approach? Let me know if you've already answered this. Love the podcast. Tailwinds, Rodney, and Carl. Okay, well, if you look at an approach plate and it says DME or actually it usually says VOR/DME, basically the title of the approach is tells you that the navigation equipment required to join and fly the approach is indicated by the title. So that means if you're going to fly, the VOR/DME approach is a non-precision approach using a VOR. What is that? VHF omnidirectional radio. It's a type of ground navigational aid. I'm sure you know about a VOR. DME is distance measuring equipment. That's usually associated with the VOR, so that you tune in the VOR frequency. If it's a VOR DME, you'll get not only bearing information, but also distance from that ground-based navigational aid. And the approach is based on or built from that ground-based navigational radio. And it'll have a final approach course, and it'll have altitudes printed on it, etc. I'm not going to go in and tell you exactly how to fly a VOR DME approach, because we don't have enough time on the show to do that. But I can give you or send you to a link with information about how to fly approaches. It's from the FAA. You may have heard of them. And it's their Instrument Procedures Handbook. And I'll have a link to Chapter 4, which is the chapter on flying instrument approaches and instrument approach procedures. So that is, and so in this case, a VOR DME approach is one that requires that you have equipment in your airplane that can tune in and use the VOR and DME, so you can fly that approach. And you have to, of course, be an instrument-rated pilot to do it. Also GPS. Well, GPS is Global Positioning Satellite System, or Global Positioning System. Now, many of the approaches that we use, ILS approaches, localizers, VOR DMEs, NDBs, etc., use ground-based navigational aids. Well, a GPS approach is an approach just like these, but instead of using ground-based navigational aids, they use satellites, so space-based navigational aids. And I'll have a link to this article from Garmin, a manufacturer of GPS systems, that talk about the Global Positioning System. And they say it's a satellite-based navigation system made up of a network of 24 satellites placed into orbit by the U.S. Department of Defense. GPS was originally intended for military applications, but in the 1980s, back in the other century, the government made the system available for civilian use. GPS works in any weather conditions anywhere in the world 24 hours a day. There are no subscription fees or setup charges to use GPS, unlike the Dish Network and DirecTV. Okay, how it works. GPS satellites circle the Earth twice a day in a very precise orbit and transmit signal information to Earth. GPS receivers take this information and use triangulation to calculate the user's exact location. Essentially, the GPS receiver compares the time a signal was transmitted by a satellite with the time it was received. The time difference tells the GPS receiver how far away the satellite is. Now, with distance measurements from a few more satellites, the receiver can determine the user's position and display it on the unit's electronic map. So a GPS receiver, to get two-dimensional position information, has to have at least 3 satellites. To get 3D information, so latitude, longitude, and altitude, you have to have at least 4 or more satellites in view. And once the user's position has been determined, the GPS unit can calculate other information, such as speed, bearing, track, trip distance, distance to destination, sunrise, sunset, time, and more. And GPS is very accurate. And so if you want to learn more about the system, I'll have a link in the show notes to this site on Garmin.com. So again, a GPS approach is an approach based using those satellites. As long as you have the equipment on your airplane, a satellite receiver that can fly a GPS approach, you can fly that particular approach. It's very accurate. And so I hope that answers all your questions, Rodney and Carl. That's cool that you're in virtual airlines, and it's cool you're getting private pilot training, and I hope that I wish you every success. Keep listening and keep sending in feedback. And Nick is back again. He says, I have a couple of questions for you and your mechanic listeners that are trained for the 737 next generation. Number 1, how much force does it take for an air start unit to start one engine from a dead stop to idle? So I'm thinking to myself, how would I know that? Oh, I know. When I look up into the upper panel of the Mad Dog and we are about to start engines, we look at this pneumatic pressure gauge. It's a tiny little gauge. It's about the size of a nickel. And it has a little pointer on it, and it has numbers, and like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then it says times 10. So I know that it takes between 35 to 40 pounds per square inch of pressure from either the APU bleed air or an external unit or one of the engines to provide enough pressure to spin the engine for engine start. So that's on the Mad Dog, and that's on that's a normal situation. So about 35 to 40 psi. Number 2, I heard that an air start unit can be used as a temporary air conditioning unit on the 737 and the 7576. Can you deny or confirm this rumor? Well, yes, Nick, I can. I can confirm it. The bleed air, and this is true for almost every airplane that I've ever flown, the bleed air from the air start unit, we call it a huffer. Once you connect that, instead of using it to spin the engines for starting, you instead direct it to to power the air conditioning packs, the air conditioning air cycle units. And those will, they don't care where the bleed air is coming from, if it's coming from an external unit or if it's coming from one of the engines that's running on the airplane. It takes that very, very hot compressed air and does its thing and produces cold air and mixes it with hot air and that kind of thing. And so you can use it as an air conditioning unit, basically. So you're essentially, again, using the start unit to run your air conditioning packs. Works great. And then when it's time to start the engines, usually you turn off the air conditioning packs, direct all that air to the engine starter, and then it spins the engine, you get the engine going, and voila, you're good to go. So that's the way it works. He says, lastly, Nick says, lastly, on the last episode, 119, which is not the last episode, the listener, after my feedback, asked about the 737 flight management computer, the FMC. I would personally recommend to set up for flight, and assuming she or he has a smartphone or an iPad, to make a search in YouTube for how to use PMDG 737 FMC and choose an option. Hope this helps. If it doesn't, I'm more than happy to help personally. So take care, Nick. So it sounds like Nick knows something about 737 flight management computers. And that's a great tip, Nick, for the listener who asked the question to do a Google search or a Bing search or whatever internet search thing you want to use for PMDG 737 FMC. And that should take you through exactly how to program that flight management computer. Let's keep moving here. Joe says, I'm a recent listener to the podcast and started somewhere around episode 100, and you're doing a great job. Well, thanks. Appreciate that, Joe. As a student in aviation, this podcast is a great way to continue my education throughout the year. Back a few podcasts, Kimmy from Vancouver asked about females in aviation. My friend's mom is a pilot for Acme as well. I forget what she flies, but I believe it's the 717 or the 767 domestic routes. I was going to recommend you try to get her on the podcast. Well, maybe I'll do that. I wanted to ask you 2 questions. First, what are your favorite airports to fly in and out of? One of my professors was a former Acme pilot, and he loved flying in South Florida due to the spotty clouds. One of his favorite things was weaving in and out of the clouds along the coasts. Okay. My favorite airports, I mean, I don't really have a favorite or a least favorite. I've kind of answered the question many times on previous episodes. I do like flying, to places like, and this is quite the opposite for a lot of pilots don't purposely bid away from some of the airports I like flying into and out of. Washington National, DCA. I like the river visual approach. I think it's a kick in the pants to hand fly, the airplane all the way down the river. Because you know me, I love hand flying. I mean, that's why I do this job. I love flying airplanes, not pushing buttons. Same thing with the expressway visual in New York, LaGuardia. I love that approach. That's fun. I love hand flying the airplane. It's a challenge. San Diego is a fun one to go into. Haven't been there in many years. But basically I like all the airports. They're all different, just like women. I love them all. They're all different. They all have good things about them. So, hope that didn't sound sexist. I didn't mean it to. Just like a gender attracted to the same or opposite gender. No, it just doesn't sound the same. Sorry. Okay, I tried. So, secondly, I wanted to ask you, as well as any other listeners, about what it would take to become a dispatcher. I know that it requires getting your certification, but are there any other qualifications? Also, what exactly do dispatchers do on a day-to-day basis? Not a lot, let me tell you. I'm just kidding, Mike. Dispatcher Mike is a frequent listener and contributor to my show. He also works at Acme, and he just got I don't know if I told you this, but he's now the supervisor of international dispatchers in Atlanta at the big building. And congratulations to you, Mike. You deserve it. But they work very hard, and you've heard me say that in the past. And to get a better feel. And I know that we have several people either training to be dispatchers or are dispatchers listening to the show. And I would recommend that you go to, here, let me make sure I get this right, my 50%, I think it's .net. Let me see. My 50% that's why I have to make sure. I knew it's my 50%, but I'm not sure if it's com or net. And come on, computer. Come on, internet. You can do it. You can do it. I know you can. I know. While we're waiting, why don't we listen to some music? Bum, 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 bum. We're still waiting. Yes. It loaded. Hang on. Push this button. Okay, my50%.net, a flight dispatcher's view of the airline industry. And it's a great blog that my good friend Mike does, Dispatcher Mike. And you can learn all about all kinds of interesting stuff involving the world of dispatching. And let's see, I was going to point you to another resource. Let's see, dispatchers and that podcast, Airplane Geeks. Great podcast. I talk about it all the time. I was a guest on their show several months ago. Had a great time. Max Flight and all those guys over there are very nice people. Oh, come on. Unable to connect to the internet. I just lost my internet connection. Well, anyway, do a search for Airplane Geeks and Dispatcher, and they did a whole episode on dispatchers. And in fact, Dispatcher Mike was one of the guests on their show. And so maybe you can get a little bit of a feel for what it takes to be a dispatcher and what they do and all that kind of stuff. So if anybody out there listening, any of you dispatchers out there listening, want to chime in and maybe help give Joe more resources, don't hesitate to send it to me, and then I'll pass it on to Joe. Joe has a great email address. It's at auburn.edu. And he says, sorry for the long feedback. Oh, it wasn't long at all, Joe. Keep up the great work. Blue skies, tailwinds, and War Eagle. Yeah. That's what he put on there. So War Eagle, Joe. Absolutely. That was the college I graduated from. Okay. How are we doing on time? Is it just about time for me to take a break and get something to eat? Maybe. Now, let me do one more here. And then I'll take a break. And then I'll either, let's get on with it. Vicky writes, as much as I'd love to say I'm a long-time listener, I actually only stumbled across your podcast a few days ago and only had the chance to listen to 4 of your podcasts. But I just wanted to contact you to thank you. Okay, Vicky, I'll let it go. You've only listened to 4, which, let me tell you what, 4 is plenty, Vicky. You don't need to listen to any more. Just listen to this point on, because I guarantee you, stuff that I've talked about in previous shows and answers and that kind of thing are going to come up again, guaranteed. But if you want to subject yourself to more of me, then feel free to do that. Okay, continuing, Vicky writes, I'm a 27-year-old female living in Melbourne, Australia. I hear it's a beautiful place, by the way. And until a few months ago, I had absolutely no interest in aviation. In fact, I used to be terrified of flying, and it's only recently, since I've been traveling interstate across Australia for work quite frequently, that I've gotten used to it. I don't know the names of any aircraft, and to be honest, I'm still trying to fully understand how a plane actually flies. Vicky, I'm trying to figure it out too. Okay. However, a few months ago, I found a BBC radio show called Cabin Pressure, a comedy set on a charter airline, and I devoured its 4 seasons within a matter of days. Although the show more about the crew and life on the airline rather than any technical details, I really enjoyed it, and it began to pique my interest in aviation. I started watching videos about the most dangerous airports to land and take off at, and anything else I could find. Then, a few days ago, in the need to want to know more, I tried a search for a podcast that would talk about aviation, but also one that a newbie like myself could follow along to without any or everything going completely over my head, and found yours. That you can podcast about aviation to enthusiasts, fellow pilots, and a newbie like myself is the sign of a truly good show. Well, thank you, Vicky. What it seems to have taken me several paragraphs to say is basically thank you for such a fantastic podcast. You're welcome. I enjoy the format of the show with topics each week and love listening to the feedback, questions, and your answers. Some of the terminology does go over my head, and I do have to Google some phrases you mentioned, but I am learning about aviation in a fun and enjoyable way. I'll sign off now, as I've got a backlog of your older podcasts to get through. Thanks again, Vicki. And Vicki, thank you for that. I do know that I have people like you who are who are aviation enthusiasts but are not involved in any other way in the profession, or are not private pilots, or are not radio control pilots, or not simulator pilots, or not drone pilots. Or can you tell I'm near an airport? Somebody putting the reverse thrust on quite heavily. Hopefully they're still on the runway. Okay. I'm sorry, I was distracted. Speaking of distracted, my hotel room window, which I've situated, I think the housekeepers probably hate it, although I do try to put the room back together the way I found it, and I'm usually successful at doing that. But if they came in right now, they'd probably go, what are you doing? Rearranging the furniture. This is a two-room suite. Well, not two-room. It's like, well, it's a suite hotel. And when you first walk in, you have like a sofa and some chairs and a TV and a kind of like a little mini kitchen area and a desk. And then you move through like a little hallway and you have your bathroom. And then you come into this area where I am right now, the back part of it, where you have a king-size bed and another TV and nightstands, a dresser, but no desk. Okay. But you have this beautiful window that I'm sitting in front of right now. And I found that using windows is a good way to give good lighting for the video. And this doesn't happen too often, but my window in this room just happens to look out at the swimming pool here at the Wyndham in El Paso at the airport. And I'm on a pretty low floor. I'm only on the second floor. And so I can see everything that's going on out there, and that's why occasionally I seem distracted. But and it also overlooks the beautiful blue sky, and I'm pointed right at the airport, so occasionally I'll see people, or not people, but airplanes taking off, and it's just it's a wonderful distraction for an aviation enthusiast like myself. So boy, I really got off track there, didn't I? So okay, back to Vicki. Thank you for your feedback. It really is heartening to know that people can listen to the show who don't know much about flying, and I do have to remember or remind myself, as you did, Vicki, that when I'm saying stuff like QRH and ATIS and ILS and stuff like that, I really have to remember sometimes to go, okay, they may not have any idea what I'm talking about. Like when I was first reading Flying Magazine, when I was like, 10, 11, 12 years old, I had no idea what ILSs were and VR. And we didn't have the internet. I didn't have Google to search on to figure out what it was. You'd have to go to the library. Or for me, it was just reading one after another flying magazine. And over time, I started figuring out, based on the context, what this stuff was. So, this is a great world we're living in now with all the knowledge, information we have right at our fingertips, in our pockets. I mean, this phone here, this iPhone 5, is so much more powerful a computer than anything back just 10, 15 years ago. It's amazing. We have supercomputers in our pockets. Okay, I got distracted again. Sorry. So, thank you for confirming that this is a show that people can listen to, even if they don't know that much about aviation. Because I don't know much about aviation. I'm the one that's doing the show. So, oh, well, another stab at humor. Thank you, Vicki. One of these days, I hope to get to Melbourne and check out that beautiful city that I hear so much about. I can do this one. Here's a short one. Steve writes, I appreciate your recent explanation of chop, which is the up and down motion that most of us would call turbulence. However, earlier in the same podcast, you mentioned eating dinner at a place called the Chop House. As a pilot, how could you possibly enjoy eating at a place called the Chop House? Did you have to keep your seatbelt fastened the whole time? Oh, I need to have a laugh track. Do I have a laugh track somewhere? Yes. Oh, sorry, it's making me laugh. Okay, all right, that's enough. Oh my gosh, that was a long track. So that was funny, Steve. Maybe not quite that funny, but it was funny. Thank you. I do appreciate that. Humor is a good thing. Okay, excuse me. Wow. Sorry for the belches. Asa, that's my body telling me I need some beer. Asa writes, also I make that sound when I've had too much beer. He says, not necessarily feedback for the show. Well, sorry, Asa. Too late. This is feedback for my show. He says, hi, Captain Jeff. Hope all is well with you and the family. I'm traveling here in Washington State in the town of Burien, B-U-R-I-E-N, Burien. Years ago, I found this brewery called the Elliott Bay Brewery, and it became a favorite go-to spot when we travel in and around SeaTac, Seattle, Tacoma. The reason I thought of you today is because I saw something new on their menu called Cilantro IPA. Have you ever seen or tried something like that? It's really pleasant. No, I haven't. I'll have to head out to Elliott Bay Brewery and check it out myself. By the way, the Pacific Northwest, including British Columbia, is, I guess that's part of the Pacific Northwest, is, I think, the most beautiful part of our great country, United States. And I love it. I wouldn't mind living there someday. Okay, back to Asa. Oh, by the way, when we spoke on Skype in March, you talked about taking the ferry out of downtown Vancouver and going over to the North Shore back in your 727 days. You were looking for the name of a place, but I didn't have the presence of mind at the time. I believe the name you were looking for was Lonsdale Key. Is that correct? Safe flying and cheers, Asa. Yes, I think it is. Thank you. Asa is a big supporter of the Airline Pilot Guy, and I do appreciate everything that you do to help out with the show, Asa. You and everybody else out there who contribute their hard-earned money and contribute their time with feedback and everything else. Thank you so much. Sound like somebody was booing. All right, let's try this one. Yeah, that's more like it. This is applause for you, Asa, and everybody else out there who contribute to the coffee fund and send me feedback and just listen. Thanks for just listening. Really appreciate that. Okay, well, I am definitely going to take a break now. We've hit the 2-hour mark, and I do have some more to do, like Luke and Brian and Nick and Etienne, Israel, Han, Darren, Jack, Dr. Steph, Mike, Eduardo, Frick, Rob, and maybe you. And I'm not sure I'm going to be able to get to all of you in this episode, but rest assured I'll get to you eventually and answer your questions. So I'm going to pause, and I'll be right back after, well, maybe not right back, but I'll be back sometime, either later tonight or tomorrow when I'm in Norfolk, Virginia. So don't go anywhere. You know the rules. Okay, I'm back. You know, after talking about Cilantro IPA, I thought, I'm thirsty. So I went down to the, you know, there's not a lot of places to go here. I'm at the airport, at the Wyndham El Paso airport, and really nothing around. So you're kind of stuck at the airport. At least the hotel here. And so I had, well, I went down. They're having happy hour, and they don't have Cilantro IPA. Elliott Bay Brewing. No. they don't have really much of a selection at all. But I did have a Sierra Nevada Pale Ale. Would have preferred an IPA of some sort, but yeah, no, not really. So, and they had like some bar food for free, pilot special. Hamburgers, like little mini hamburger sliders. So, had a couple of those and a couple Sierra Nevada Pale Ales, and I'm good to go. And I really should start breaking all this stuff down and stop recording so I can get a good night's sleep. But you know what? I'm going to keep going. That's what I'm going to do. I've decided. All right, so we're going to keep on going with Luke. Let's see what Luke has to say. Luke, take it away.
Hi, Captain Jeff, and hello to all your listeners. This is Luke from Australia. Really enjoy the podcast. Really appreciate the effort. Trying to do some audio feedback here so I know how much effort it would take doing it every week. So really appreciate the content. So I really wanted to contribute. I believe not so long ago there was a question about the A320 and the throttle system. And so really how it works is once you're 1,500 feet above the ground or thereabouts and you reduce the thrust to the climb out thrust, the throttles will not move for the rest of the flight, not until the final stages of the approach when you're beginning the flare or the retard. The computer will actually shout out to you, retard, 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 and that's the point where the thrust levers are pulled back. So it's all called auto thrust, and I've found quite a good link on YouTube, which would probably be able to explain it a little bit more than I did, being a bit nervous on the audio thing here. So I'll send that with the audio feedback. So I hope that helps explain at that. And for those of you who wonder what that identifiable sound is of an A320 or an A320 family aircraft as it flies overhead on its way into the airport, what that is the landing lights. The landing lights located under the fuselage, under the centre of the fuselage between the wings. And as they stick out into the airflow, they create this identifiable sound. And you can feel it on board as well. Particularly if you're sitting in the middle of the aircraft, you can sort of feel that vibration, slightly like the vibration you can feel when the air brakes are coming up to help slow down the aircraft down. So for any airplane spotters out there who have ever wondered what that sound is, that's exactly what it is. And another sound that people get, especially nervous flyers, get very concerned about on the A320 family is the power transfer unit, the PTU. And if you want some more, if there's any listeners who would like some more information on that, then if you just do a YouTube search for A320 PTU, you'll find some very good videos on that, and you'll be able to see and hear what I'm talking about. So, thank you very much, Captain Jeff, and hello to all your listeners again, and really enjoy the podcast and looking forward to future editions. Thank you.
Thank you, Luke. And I don't know why you said you were nervous. You did a fantastic job. You couldn't tell at all. And I do apologize. I clicked on your link while you were speaking, and it started automatically playing the YouTube video in the back. And it's a video of the Airbus A319 private jet tour. All right, so I really won't play much more of that, but I'll have a link to it in the show notes. How about that? That's a good deal, I think. All right, so I'm going to close that window so it doesn't start talking again, playing over me and my friends who send in feedback. Okay, so thanks again for your comments about the throttle system and the various sounds, lights, and power transfer unit. I think the PTU makes that barking sound that some people say it reminds them of. Okay, Brian says, "This is my first time providing feedback. I'll be gentle. But I've been listening to your podcast for almost 3 months now, trying to catch up, and I really like the YouTube videos. Quickly about me, I was very interested in aviation since I was a young kid. I used to belong to an Aviation Explorers chapter, a chapter of the Boy Scouts of America, and have attended off and on the Oshkosh Air Show since 1995. I enlisted in the Air National Guard and went through BMT, I guess that's basic military training, and tech school in San Antonio, Texas, where I became a medic and caught the EMS, Emergency Medical Services, and firefighting bug, and became a paramedic and firefighter instead of a pilot. Some days I wake up and wish I'd gone the pilot route, and others I'm glad to be a paramedic. At age 32, I'm currently working towards my private pilot certificate and have a meager 21 hours to date. Well, you know what? Everybody started off with a meager amount of hours, even Captain Jeff. Anyways, in your last episode, episode 120, Sport Pilot Dave asked your listeners, viewers, to encourage members of Congress to support the General Aviation Pilots Protection Act, GAPA, which basically removes the third-class medical certificate requirement for almost all general aviation pilots who fly single-engine and small planes and only operate under VFR conditions. This does not include instructors, commercial pilots, and IFR multi-engine pilots, etc. I want to add to his comments. I very recently had my third-class medical physical, and I must say that other than the vision and hearing tests and requirements, I walked away from that physical, which I easily passed, wondering what the heck does any of this have to do with flying small private aircraft. Granted, I am fortunate enough to not yet require glasses and have no pre-existing medical problems that would prevent me from flying, but I was told before I took my physical that it was based more on past pre-existing medical conditions than anything else. I was also told it was no different than, say, any sports physical I had in high school. All that said, I would say that it was less thorough than any sports physical I had in high school, and was certainly much less thorough and detailed than the DOT physical I'm required to go through once a year for my job as a medic and firefighter, and even less thorough than a MEPS physical. I don't know what that is. Now, granted, I don't want just anyone with serious medical issues flying an aircraft, but I think that the third-class medical restrictions are a bit too much considering, and the physical itself is, well, a joke. If the FAA was really serious about preventing people who had medical problems from flying, then one would have to get a much more detailed physical once a year instead of every 5 years, given how it's nothing more than vision, hearing, blood pressure, turn your head and cough, not sure what that has to do with flying, etc. Also, I would say some of the requirements are too restrictive for private pilots. So I guess my question would be, what are your thoughts on GA pilots, and physicals and or medical requirements? I've read the FAA's website and requirements for first class, second class, and third class medical certificates. How often do you have to do the first class physical, and does Acme or any other airline also require physicals that are more or less stringent than the FAA's? I know that some flight schools and some insurance companies that provide insurance to private pilots require physicals that are more restrictive than the FAA requirements. Sorry if this was very long-winded. You have a friend in Kansas City, and anytime you're here in Kansas City on a layover, I would be glad to buy you a local beer and some great barbecue. Yeah, they have, what is it, Boulevard Brewing, I think, in Kansas City. Good beer. Wishing you blue skies and tailwinds, Brian. And let's see. What do I think? I'm still trying to figure out what I think about this. I'm not really sure. I'm getting information pro and con against the third class physical, and I'm going to play, or not play, but I'm going to read one more that kind of takes the other side of the coin view on third class medicals. As far as me, I have to take a first class medical certificate every 6 months, so twice a year. And on the annual one, every February, the cycle that I'm in right now, every February, I have to get an EKG as well as the regular 6-month first class medical. What was I going to say about that? Okay, so it really depends on, as far as the stringency, the how effective, how thorough the exam is, really depends on your FAA designated examiner, medical examiner. Some, basically, if you show up and you're breathing, you are going to pass. Others make it a little bit more rigorous, and they really do check your vision, and really do check all the stuff. And if there's a problem, they'll, definitely bring it to your attention and bring it to the FAA's attention. But we all know that there are places you can go and you just pays your money and you're going to get your first-class medical certificate. And as long as you're standing, breathing, and don't run into the wall, you'll probably pass, because they're more interested in getting your money than anything else. So it runs the whole spectrum. So I remember hearing from guys, the old heads, saying, go to your FAA examiner, your medical examiner, for your FAA physical, but once a year or once every couple of years, go get a real physical to really find out if you're healthy and if you need to be checking into something. So take that for what it's worth. Let's see. Oh, Brian also wrote in and said, I have more questions, but I think I'll space them out. By the way, just found your Catholic Pilot podcast and look forward to listening to those. Do you ever visit churches around the country while on layover between flights? Yeah, I do occasionally. Although most of the time I'm flying during the week, and I go to Mass in my hometown of Roswell. But occasionally I'll fly over the weekends, and I'll end up visiting a church that's not my home church. But the nice thing about being a Catholic is really every church is your church. There's not really any distinction. It's all part of the same universal church. Speaking of Catholic Pilot, I just realized today, before I started recording this podcast, that I really messed up, because I used to keep the Catholic Pilot as a separate feed from the Airline Pilot Guy, and most of all the Airline Pilot Guy shows are on the Catholic Pilot feed as well. But just a few weeks ago, a month ago or so, when I kind of started messing around with the RSS feed, I ended up, I didn't realize it until today, that I ended up basically deleting all of my Catholic Pilot shows that were hosted on my media server. So I'm hoping when I go home, I'll find one of the hard drives that I think I was keeping my backup episodes of Catholic Pilot on. And if I do, then I'm going to have to figure out a way to get them uploaded to some kind of a server somewhere, somehow, so that those of you who are interested in listening to some of those early shows, because when I started podcasting back in 2009, I was the Catholic Pilot, and I did that until 2011, I think, May of 2011. So my early podcasts are under the Catholic Pilot branding. Many of them are very much like the show that you're listening to right now, but some of them are, definitely more dedicated to my Catholic faith than flying. But you can kind of tell that from the title. But I know that many of you are interested in listening to some of those shows, and I was kind of, interested in listening to, some of the first shows that I did, just to kind of see how bad I sounded. But it's gone. They're gone. I don't know. They're gone. So I'm hoping I have a good backup at home. And if so, I'll let you know. So there you go. So it is now time to get over here and play something like, I don't know, this. Okay, Nick writes, great job on the podcast. It gets me through my job as an aircraft records analyst, an ARA. I work right next to Miami International Airport, and I see many Acme Air MD-80s flying in and out of here. If you ever happen to find yourself in Miami sometime, I do occasionally, I know a lot of great places to hang out and have a couple of beers and some great food. Just shoot me an email at blank, blah, 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 blank, or give me add me on LinkedIn at blah, 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 blah. Thanks for the excellent podcast. Hope to see you around here someday. Regards, Nick. You bet, Nick. I know there are a couple other folks in the Miami area, so maybe we can get an APG meetup sometime in Miami. That'd be a lot of fun. Great town. Something big is taking off right now. Okay. Etienne sent me some verbal audio feedback, so let's listen to him.
Hello, Captain Jeff. This is Etienne Maric from Madrid, Spain. I lived in 16 countries as I worked for multinationals that kept moving me around. And one of the assignments when I was a young field engineer in an oil service business was in Sudan. And it so happened that Chevron Aviation had a fleet of DC-3s, Twin Otters, Convair, and usually on the Twin Otters I would be in the co-pilot seat, and that's where I got the aviation bug, doing the radio, sometimes handling the controls. So at the time, my next assignment was Dubai, and this is where I learned to fly at Dubai International Airport. The flying school there was actually a helicopter operation, but they had about 5 or 4 Piper Cherokees from one of the local sheikhs, and they were used by the flying school to give instructions. The people giving instruction were basically following the British system, and the chief flying instructor was almost like coming out of a movie in his RAF overall uniform. And each lesson, and I've never seen this in other places, but each lesson was extremely well structured. You had a 1-hour briefing, normally 1 hour flying lesson, and then about a 20-30 minutes debriefing thereafter. And there was no such thing as ground school being charged separately. That was part of the flying lessons. And you said something in 120 about these early days, and there are a few things that have marked me from these early days. One of them is airmanship. There was a lot of insistence on airmanship at all respects, even respect for other people nearby, like noise when you do your run-ups. Quite a few other words of wisdom that I remember very well doing my first solo in Sharjah airport. I could hear his voice, even though he was not in the seat next to me anymore. Anyway, I got some other impressive instructors that have left me, like Mabel Fletcher out of Houston Hobby Airport. I finally got my US ticket and followed through all the way up to Asmel, still remaining a private pilot, and now getting my aviation fix from listening to your fantastic podcast, as I don't actually fly too much anymore. One thing which has surprised me a bit is during vacation in Florida, I've been going frequently to the same flying school, FBO, out of Palm Beach, in the Palm Beach area. And I was, being an electrical engineer, of course, interested in the latest gadgets. And what I chose there was the Garmin 1000 equipped airplanes to do my biennial review, etc. What I was surprised is that I never really got any instruction on proper airmanship in a glass cockpit, which surprised me a bit. Maybe it's another point to add to the automation debate. Thanks so much for your podcast. and keep the blue side up.
I'll do that, Etienne. Thank you for taking the time to record the audio. I really love that. I love hearing your voices and your accents and all that kind of stuff. It's really makes the show much more interesting than me reading your feedback. So thank you. Yeah, you bring up a really good point about airmanship, and that's something that I think we're losing in our career field. I really do. And, I thought I need to remind myself, what exactly is airmanship? So I did some searching online, and I found this on Wikipedia. Airmanship is skill and knowledge applied to aerial navigation, similar to seamanship and maritime navigation. Airmanship covers a broad range of desirable behaviors and abilities in an aviator. It is not simply a measure of skill or technique, but also a measure of a pilot's awareness of the aircraft, the environment in which it operates, and of his or her own abilities or capabilities. Airmanship can be defined as a sound acquaintance with the principles of flight, the ability to operate an airplane with competence and precision, both on the ground and in the air, and the exercise of sound judgment that results in optimal operational safety and efficiency. The three fundamental principles of expert airmanship are skill, proficiency, and the discipline to apply them in a safe and efficient manner. Discipline is the foundation of airmanship. The complexity of the aviation environment demands a foundation of solid airmanship and a healthy, positive approach to combating pilot error. So, good point about the fact that you used the Garmin 1000 system. Nobody really said a thing about airmanship. That's just something you don't really hear anybody talk about anymore. And I'm so glad you brought it up. And so that's something worth exploring in future episodes. If you have any thoughts about it, if you're listening, are we just, robots pushing buttons, or are we people that have skills, know our abilities and capabilities, and know something about principles of flight, foundations, fundamentals? There's more to this job than meets the eye. And I think that indefinable difference between a really good pilot and one who's just doing this for a living is airmanship. Israel, from Brazil, says, Brazilian Israel here, for quite some time now, we have been seeing a series of funny safety videos posted on the internet, such as the one from the link below. And you'll remember this one. I don't know how long it'll take for the internet to load this, but it was the Southwest flight attendant. I just did this one recently on, a couple episodes ago, I think.
Pretend to have your attention for just a few moments. My ex-husband, my new boyfriend, and their divorced attorney are going to show you the safety features of Boeing 737-800 series. It's been
Anyway, you remember her. She was, by the way, on a show here in the United States called Ellen DeGeneres, and two of her daughters were on the show with her, and it was a good show. Anyway, so let me get back to Israel. He says, while I do prefer to listen to a funny safety instruction like this one instead of the regular standard ones, it got me thinking about the legal requirements that the FAA might have regarding how these instructions should be given, and if there are any FAA requirements. If you could you explore this a little bit on your show if you get a chance? And Israel is in Greenville, North Carolina, not Brazil. I guess he's from Brazil. All right, so I did a little bit of research and found this regulation. It is 14 CFR. You may have heard of that. It's the Federal Aviation Regulations, 14 Code of Federal Regulations, Chapter 1, Part 135.117, Briefing of Passengers Before Flight. Before each takeoff, each pilot in command of an aircraft carrying passengers shall ensure that all passengers have been orally briefed on smoking, the fact that each passenger shall be briefed on when, where, and under what conditions smoking is prohibited. Of course, we know that on Part 121 carriers, it is always prohibited. Number 2, the use of safety belts, including instructions on how to fasten and unfasten the safety belts. I never got that. I mean, really? You don't know how to fasten a safety belt? Each passenger shall be briefed on when, where, and under what conditions the safety belt must be fastened about that passenger. Placement of seat backs in an upright position before takeoff and landing. Location and means for opening the passenger entry door and emergency exits. Location of survival equipment. If the flight involves extended overwater operation, ditching procedures, and the use of required flotation equipment. If the flight involves operations above 12,000 feet mean sea level, the normal and emergency use of oxygen, location and operation of fire extinguishers, blah, blah, blah. There's a whole bunch of list of things that pilot in command must brief his or her passengers about. And then, of course, it says that you can also use your a representative crew. Another crew member can do this. Of course, in the airlines, the flight attendants do this for the most part. And the oral briefing required by paragraph A of this section must be supplemented by printed cards, which must be carried in the aircraft in locations convenient for the use of each passenger. Okay, you know, those little safety cards that we have in the seat backs in front of us. Let's see. Also, the briefing required by paragraph A may be delivered by means of an approved recording playback device that is audible to each passenger under normal noise levels. Okay, in this regulation, I don't see anything in here that says that you can't use a sense of humor. It's just that those basics have to be conveyed. And so I guess there are no restrictions on whether you do a musical or do something funny, if you do a cartoon, whatever, as long as you cover these items. So that's all I could find. If you have a better answer for Israel, please let me and all of us know, okay? So thank you, Israel. Hope everything's going well in Greenville. Han writes, G'day, Captain Jeff. How's it going, mate? Yes, I've been putting it off for weeks. I thought I would let you know. I'm not sure if I'm nuts, but I started listening to your podcast in December last year, and just last week, Thursday, the 5th of June, 2014, I completely listened to all 119 episodes. Oh my gosh. Bless your heart, hon. Plus the episode 120 over the weekend. Now, I got a problem. I have nothing else to listen to. I'm keenly awaiting your next episode. I also listen to Airside Radio, 2 podcasters based in New Zealand. And as I mentioned, I'm hoping to upload and have the Catholic Pilot shows available. I'll let you know if that happens. And also some great podcasts here in the U.S. And I always hate to mention these because I'm sure I'm going to leave somebody out. But of course you have I don't know, Stuck Mike, you have Uncontrolled Airspace, you have Airplane Geeks, you have let's see, Aviation Careers Podcast, and then let's see, My Pilot Chronicles, Pilot Pips, Pilot Safety Podcast. Is that what it's called? Pilot Safety Podcast, I think. We have those guys in the UK, Simon, and oh my gosh. Well, I want to say Sean, but Sean's my friend that does the Catholic Dad podcast. Oh my goodness, why can't I remember your name? Oh, of course, Carlos. He used to send me feedback all the time. Now he's kind of busy with his own show and doesn't have it. And trust me, Carlos, I'm not trying to give you a guilt trip. I know. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I listen to your show, and I'm thinking I need to send those guys some feedback, and I just never get around to it because I'm just too busy. So Carlos and Simon have a fantastic podcast called Plane Talking UK. And so I think I already mentioned Pilot Pips. Pilot Pips doing something with them too. That's kind of cool. Both British podcasters. or podcasts. A lot of other great ones. Across the Pond, that's not his podcast, though. What is it called? Aviation Extended. There's some great podcasts in Australia. Again, as I said, I'm probably going to forget somebody's podcast, and I don't mean to, because I listen to a bunch of them. By the way, I used to listen to aeronews.net, their daily Aero News podcast. Did that thing disappear? I just looked for it the other day, and the last one that I see posted is like March, and it's June. So maybe they just stopped doing that audio podcast. I don't know. Anyway, so a lot of great stuff out there, a lot of great podcasts out there for you to look at. Okay, so now let's get on with Hans' feedback. Not too sure if you are aware of this. On the 31st of May, which was what? Just a week and a half ago? Darwin International Airport was shut down due to volcanic activity from Indonesia. All flights were canceled in and out of Darwin for more than 24 hours. Flights over the Northern Territory were prohibited, and flights were redirected away from affected areas. It was quoted that ash particles were as high as 20 to 40,000 feet. Wow. I took some screen grabs of the airport flight information system. It was a very, very quiet day over our skies. All the flights to Asia flew over us were redirected either south of us or east of us. I only saw 2 planes, both Vietnam Airlines, that flew over Darwin at flight level 340 on Saturday afternoon, when all the airlines were flying far, far away from the ash clouds. I thought it was the aviation safety boards, the FAA, CASA, that prohibited flight through ash clouds in the countries that were affected. Why these 2 flights were allowed through the ash clouds where no other flights were. Why were they, I guess is why he's asking, or what he's asking. Have you been through ash clouds or redirected due to ash clouds in your flight path? What is Acme's policy on ash clouds? No, I have not personally, and Acme's policy is to stay well clear of ash clouds because they can do major damage to your engine turbines. 3 weeks ago, I was on an Embraer 170 from Townsville to Darwin on what we call Scare North, an airline based in Darwin. I looked out my window and I saw the wing with paint missing. He sent me a photo. I'm not too sure if this would be a concern to you, as I can see down to bare base metal on the wing. I thought that the planes need special paints to resist rust and other metal-related issues with high humidity environments like the tropics. Would you be okay with this plane if you saw that on the wing? Yeah, the American Airlines until recently didn't even have paint on their airplanes, so I'm not concerned. I think that in general the aluminum and titanium that they use for fuselage skin is fine without paint on it. I think it's more of a branding thing, actually. So yeah, I'd be okay with that. Lastly, a couple of years ago, I took a flight from Adelaide to Melbourne on a 737-400 on a major carrier. A quick 60-minute flight. It was a hot summer day. Outside was 38 centigrade, or Celsius. Let's see, 38, that's about 35, 95. That's around 100 degrees. We boarded the flight. It was boiling inside. Once everybody was on board, the flight crew was on the PA saying that the APU was broken and they needed to start up engine 1 at the gate with the ground power unit, and there was also no air conditioning. The flight took off on time, landed on time. We arrived at the gate. Captain came on the PA again, saying we need to wait a little longer as they need to get connected to they need to connect the GPU to the plane. So we waited about 5 minutes. All's good. Then, suddenly all the power went out when the engines shut down. Backup lights lit up. We deplaned in the dark. As we were exiting the plane, I saw the cockpit, which was pitch black. No display, nothing. The flight crew were trying to get the power back. I was wondering, what could have happened? Does your flight system like a sudden, unexpected shutdown? No. Does it damage the system? Not usually. Does do airline companies look down on an incident like that? Well, that's not the best face to show to the public, is it? Anyway, sorry for the long email. Hope to see you in Darwin, Australia. There will be a stab of cold one for you waiting in Darwin if you come to top end of Darwin Under. I'm pretty sure Acme will never come to DRW. By the way, thanks to Mechanic Bob for the reply to my message in 103-ish about bleeding in a jet engine. Your listener, Han. Yeah, that sometimes that happens, and it always seems to happen that you lose your power when you don't have an auxiliary power unit, and it's even worse when it happens when it's dark outside, because the emergency lighting comes on, and it's just not a good show. So, but things like that do happen. It's always just such a hassle anyway when you don't have an auxiliary power unit, you don't have your self-contained electricity and bleed air, and you're relying on all the ground exterior sources, and it's just even in optimum situations, it's just not the best thing in the world. But if you have a good ground crew and you have stuff that's working on the ground, then it's not too bad. But sorry you had that bad experience. But especially when it's hot, it's just hard to keep the airplane cool when you don't have your own power unit. It sounds to me like they were doing everything they could, based on their situation. But boy, so thanks, Han, for all the great feedback regarding the volcano and the ash clouds and the missing paint and the airplane with the not working power unit. Hope to hear from you again soon. Okay, Darren writes, let's see. Number 1, what's the furthest distance you have flown in your current aircraft from your home base of Atlanta? And I was trying to think, probably the nonstop flight to Honolulu when I was flying co-pilot on the L-1011, and that's approximately 4,000 nautical miles. And number 2, when you go through security with your podcast equipment, do the security guards ever ask you why you have so much equipment in your bags? I can always tell when my bags are going through and then all of a sudden the belt stops. And I'm thinking, oh, okay, they're looking at my bag. And so I usually yell over. I have a lot of audio electronic equipment. And then they usually get the bag or the belt rolling again. And then they'll usually say something like, oh, karaoke, huh? And then, no, it's a internet radio show is what I usually say. And then that's usually enough, and they let me go. So, yeah. Sometimes they don't say a thing, and other times they stop and they look and they stare at the screen. And I usually, when I mention the audio equipment, they usually are satisfied with that. But more and more of the places that I fly now, fortunately, have known crew member, and I don't have to put my bag through anything anymore. So I'm not getting that look a lot anymore, which is good. Now tomorrow I will, because I'm here in El Paso. They don't have known crew member. Hopefully they won't frown too much, I hope. Okay, Jack writes, I love the podcast. Well, thanks, Jack. I'll make this brief because my wife gave birth to our second child last week. Oh, congratulations. And I have a million other things to do, but I wanted to make sure you saw this. And of course, he pointed to that original story, an interview of Captain Mark Gungle, the guy that landed that 737, and if it hadn't been for him, they would have crashed, and it would have been a terrible. No, just kidding. I talked about that in the news, and I would love to know your thoughts. I would think a first officer would want to just fly solo rather than bringing someone else into the mix. Have you thought about this? Yes. And what qualifications would you think would be helpful? I'm not an airline pilot. I consider aviation a vocation of sorts, and I have my CFI, but have yet to provide any dual training because I've been working on building my non-aviation tech business. That said, there isn't a week that goes by that I don't wish I had pursued it 10 to 15 years ago. I could never afford to be an airline pilot with 2 kids living in New York City. One other question that has been on my mind the last couple of weeks when hearing you discuss the bidding process. Are there any exceptions when where someone can get a special dispensation to return to base and have what I think you called domicile layovers? The person doesn't need to take work off completely, but traveling across the country would be difficult. For instance, do pilots just stop flying when their wives are 9 months pregnant so they don't miss the birth of their child? I assume that there is paternity, maternity leave in your contracts, etc., and you'd be covered under the Family Medical Leave Act, but what about important life events where it's important for you to stay closer to home than you normally would, but the timing is uncertain? For weddings, etc., you can schedule in advance and bid appropriately, but can you predict when someone's going to have a baby? I assume female pilots who are pregnant would need to go on disability at some point in the pregnancy. Yes. He says, I apologize for not editing this email. My 2.5-year-old son just peed where he wasn't supposed to. I remember those years. I'm sure you remember those. Yeah, I do. Thanks, Jack. I think it really depends on the airline. Yes, we do have the legal ability to take paternity/maternity leave. You can also, if you're smart, and you have the opportunity to bid your vacation time around that due date, you'll have a very good shot of being home during that time when your wife should be delivering. Of course, we all know that sometimes things don't work out that way, and Acme is really, really good at, if you are on a trip and your wife goes into labor, of getting you back like pronto, no questions asked. Very supportive with that. But there are times when it just didn't work. The timing didn't work out. Of course, C-sections, you can schedule those, but natural birth, you just have to, be flexible and hope that that you're home when the big event occurs. And again, I think that depends on the airline, varies from airline to airline. And I've been very fortunate. I have 3 children. They're not kids anymore. Well, I guess they're kids, but 20, almost 27, 20, and 17. And I was fortunate enough to be home for each of their births. And the first one when I was in the Air Force at Columbus Air Force Base, in the clinic there, and the other 2 in Atlanta, in the same hospital. Great gynecologist obstetrician that my wife had, and wonderful experience. I was there when all 3 of them came out. So I'm absolutely positive that all my children are hers. Not sure about me, but I know that they're hers because I witnessed it. Anyway, I think a lot of it has to do with timing, and I guess, if you had the seniority to try to work in the training department, I guess that's a possibility. If you have the seniority, you can bid turnarounds. We have one-day trips, that are usually, a one-day trip is usually 4 legs, but it gets you home every night. We have a bunch of 2-day trips that only take you away over 1 night. And then usually you're going in and out of Atlanta. So there are a lot of ways to skin this cat, if you know what I mean. So that's a good question. Let's see, what was the other question? Oh, regarding the Air Force pilot that helped talk on the radios and just be supportive for the first officer on that United flight when the captain had the heart attack. I would think a first officer would just want to fly solo rather than bring someone else into the mix. I agree with you. I mean, that would be my druthers, I think. Just, take the person out, get them out of the way, and just fly the airplane, talk on the radio. You know how to do this. I was kind of curious. I looked in my own company's manuals to see what the policy is, and I think that it says something about you should consider making a call to see if any deadheading pilots, and I assume that when they say deadheading pilots, I mean pilots that work for Acme on board the airplane that could come up and help. And but that's all it says. I think it says that's preferred, but it's not required. So for whatever that's worth. But I agree with you, Jack. I would think that first officer would have been better. Well, I'm not saying that she would have been better off, but I would think that most of us would just say, I got this. I'll handle it myself. Excuse me, for some reason my throat is getting stuff in it. From the last show, I was talking about Valsalva maneuvers, and somebody had asked a question about clearing ears, and she says, Dr. Steph says that she just listened to the last episode. Some quick feedback regarding pressure in the ears while flying, also called airplane ear, barotitis media, and barotrauma. Yes, you're correct. Yawning, Valsalva, moving the jaw by chewing gum, etc., essentially opens up the eustachian tube, which connects the middle ear to the nasopharynx, or the back of the nasal passages and throat, and allows pressure between the outside environment and the middle ear to equalize. I have attached an excellent article below from the Mayo Clinic that goes into more detail on causes and treatment based on severity of symptoms, and yes, this can cause severe pain, especially if flying while you have an upper respiratory illness or congestion. And I sense some judgment there, Dr. Steph. So I'll put her link in the show notes so all of you can read it and learn about barotitis media. And finally, I'm going to end with this one because it kind of goes along with a couple others that talked about the abolishment or the possible abolishment of the third-class medical. And this is from Mike. Met Mike at the Airline Pilot Guy meetup in Orlando, Mike Cochran. And he is in law enforcement. And he says, just finished episode 120 and listened with great interest to Sport Pilot Dave's opinion of the elimination of the third-class medical certificate. Although I respect his opinion, I kind of cringed with the thought of this happening. Personally, I believe that all pilots, no matter if you're flying a light sport aircraft or a Boeing 747, one should have some sort of FAA medical examination in order to keep their flying privileges. A certificated aircraft is just as deadly to passengers and to innocent bystanders on the ground as compared to a light sport aircraft if an accident occurs. Historically, based on NTSB reports that I have read, the percentages of aircraft crashes or incidents that have occurred as a result of a pilot medical issue are small. Perhaps this is because of the measures that are currently in place. I'm sure that there are many that will say that the third-class medical certificate is ineffective in detecting a pilot who has the potential for a sudden incapacitation event. Perhaps the FAA should increase the medical standards for the issuance of a third-class medical certificate to make detecting these incidents more probable. There are two reasons that immediately come to mind to base my opinion that just having a valid driver's license is an ineffective barometer to decide if one is physically and mentally fit to operate the aircraft. First, back in 2009, I had PRK, corrective eye surgery. A few days after the procedure, the ophthalmologist advised that I could start driving without corrective lenses and that my vision was to the point that I could pass the Department of Highway and Motor Vehicles vision test. I looked at her and told her, now I know why there are so many accidents. I still couldn't read the street signs, among other things. I couldn't believe that one would be allowed to operate a motor vehicle with this lack of vision acuity. Luckily for me, a couple of weeks later, the healing process was to the point that I had 20/20 vision acuity in both eyes. The second reason that comes to mind was when my grandfather was still alive. I remember taking a road trip from Florida to Pennsylvania, and he insisted on driving. This had to be one of the top 5 scariest moments in my life. We almost ran into several road guardrails and other obstacles. Further, if he got lost, his solution was to follow a semi-truck because, quote, they knew where they were going. Shortly after this trip, I notified the Florida Department of Motor Vehicles who then medically revoked his driver's license. Needless to say, he was extremely upset that part of his freedom and independence was taken away. I imagine this is probably one of the hardest things to go through as you age, probably second to moving out of your home because you can no longer take care of yourself. Having worked in law enforcement for the past 16 years, I've seen my fair share of accidents with serious injuries where people, especially the elderly, should no longer be driving. But when you talk to them, they cannot comprehend the fact that they should probably hang up the keys. Having pilots do a self-certification on themselves on whether they are medically fit to operate the aircraft, in my opinion, is probably just as effective as people self-judging themselves that they're fit to drive a car. I am definitely not looking forward to the day I get grounded, but hopefully I will be of sound mind to self-realize when the right time comes, or my AME will recognize that day for me before I injure myself or someone else. Mike makes some good points, I think. Don't you agree? So we have that side of the argument or the discussion about third-class medicals and driver's license medicals in lieu of and that kind of thing. So thank you, Mike, for taking the time to send in your feeling about that issue. And as always, thanks for listening, and I do value your opinion. All right. Well, you know what? That's going to do it. I almost caught up completely with all of the feedback. I only have 3 left for, you know what? How long have I been going? Almost 3 hours now. Maybe longer. But I'm going to do it. I'm going to finish. This is going to be the first time I'm going to finish all my feedback. Okay, Eduardo writes, my name is Eduardo. I've been listening to your podcast for more than a year already. Great job you're doing for the aviation community. I listen to you every week. I'm from Brazil, and I'm a first officer for a major airline. I flew the Boeing 737-300 for more than 1 year, and now I'm flying the Airbus 319, 320, 321 for more than 6 years. In the last podcast, I've noticed that many people, including yourself, have questions about the Airbus, its philosophy, and how it works. You many times ask your audience to answer some questions and some planes, and I would be more than glad to help you in that task about the Airbus. That is a great plane and that I love to fly. I'm always learning something new on how everything works in that plane. So if you need any help with the Airbus 319, 320, 321, I have a bunch of manuals to look for the answer and learn something new. Any question you have, you can send to my email and we'll try to get the more accurate and fast answer possible during my overnights away from home. Sorry about my English. It's really rusty. Oh, it's fine. I'm working on that. This task will be a great way to improve my English as well. Hope I can help. Glad to be part of the APG family. And when I start to fly international routes, we have to plan a meetup. Yeah, absolutely, Eduardo. Clear skies, tailwinds, not below 1,000 feet, and unlimited visibility. Bye-bye, Eduardo. Thank you, Eduardo. Thank you for volunteering to be one of my Airbus experts. So I'll definitely be able to use you as a resource. And I do appreciate you volunteering to do that. And thank you for all your kind words regarding the task. And finally, I got 2 emails. So this must be hitting the news cycle or something. But I remember talking about this a couple years ago on the show. A guy in Seattle or outside, somewhere in Washington State, a real aviation buff, ended up getting a 727 and basically making it his home. And, of course, Frick from South Africa writes, "Hi there, you started your airline pilot career in one, might as well retire in one." So the title of his email is Captain Jeff's Retirement Home. And, of course, you go to airplanehome.com and you'll see what he's talking about. It's a 727 that, as I said, somebody's using as a home. And Rob Diaz writes, "This is the luckiest guy in the world. Check the link." And again, different media link, but it's talking about the same thing. The coolest house in the world, a Boeing 727. So I'll try to make sure that I have those links in the show notes as well for everybody to take a look at. And oh my goodness, I can't believe it. I made it through all the feedback. Woo, that's cool. Maybe it will be a really short show next week. Who knows? All right. So thank you for hanging in there on this week's episode 121 of the Airline Pilot Guy. I hope you enjoyed it. I certainly do enjoy doing this show. I hope that many of you get something out of it at least. And thank you to all of you who take the time to write in and ask questions and help me answer questions for others. I mean, it really, really helps, and it makes me not look so stupid when I really don't know the answer. Because, I don't know the answer to everything. I can use some of my experience and my own knowledge to answer certain things, but a lot of times I'm clueless. So I do appreciate your help. Thanks again for listening to me. You can find me on iTunes and Stitcher, and oh, by the way, if those of you out there are listening to me via Stitcher, you may have received, if you downloaded the Stitcher app, an email that talked about their advertising and supporting podcasters and that kind of thing. And it basically implied that by buying the Stitcher app and listening to me via Stitcher, that somehow that is supporting me. And that is not, that's only true for a very, very, very small number of podcasters out there. And we're talking like huge podcasters that have huge subscriber bases and everything else. And so, I mean, I love Stitcher. I think it's a great way, another place to have my content. They do one thing that I don't like, and they kind of take one of my episodes and they recode the whole thing and make it in much less, the audio quality goes way down. So if you're listening to me on Stitcher, just know that if you go to Airline Pilot Guy and click the play button or subscribe to me on iTunes, that you'll hear a much, much better audio quality by listening to that particular source from my podcast. But hey, I know the Stitcher radio is a great thing. It's available in a lot of cars. Have at it. Hope you enjoy the show. So Stitcher, got TuneIn Radio. Let's see. Yeah, who knows where else. YouTube, if you want to see me sitting in front of my desk in my hotel room recording the show, you can find me at youtube.com/airlinepilotguy. So all that stuff, all that information is available on the site, airlinepilotguy.com. It is time for me to shut up so you can get on with your lives. Until next time, hope you have a great week, great weekend. See you back here again next week on Airline Pilot Guy. Remember, wishing you clear skies, unlimited visibility, and tailwinds. Take care and God bless.
Good day.